Good evening, everybody. Let's start with an invocation and just put our minds at the feet of our teachers and request their assistance in Ishvara, in inspiring our minds so that we can try to understand this philosophy and apply it. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Gite Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. Akanda Mandalakaram Yena Vyaptam Characharam Tat Padam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priya. Apavitra Pavitro Va Sarvavastha Gatopi Va Ya Smaret Pundarikaksham Sa Bhayabhyantara Shuchihi. So that is a traditional way of beginning a study session, and we even in the Karikas, remember the first sutra there was Namaha offered to Sri Kapila, and I need to make a correction. Thanks to one of our Sangha here, Marcia Solomon. I don't know if she's with us today, but I made a mistake in the very first. The first section, and that is there was a reference to the term Arya. Remember when we had and I said something about the Aryans and how that was a Sanskrit word and it meant essentially referred to an Aptavachana. Why didn't that mute already? Let me do this again.
New people.
Mute all. Oh, you mean you have to do this every time?
When they enter, if they don't mute themselves, yes.
Then I have to. Wow. There's no way of just like muting everybody forever.
Yes, you can set it that way in the settings, but you or someone knowledgeable would have to help you do that.
Oh, okay. Maybe someone can help me next time. So if you remember, just to correct then for the record, the page 36, right at the beginning, and since we just did our own invocation, the beginning of the first sutra, there's these Namaha to Kapila, the very first paragraph on page 36. And then the third paragraph, it says the threefold miseries, etc. The Arya is being introduced. And then it goes on to say the divine sage Kapila was the son of Brahman, and then and so forth. So I took that Arya as referring to Kapila, that he's an Aryan, because that's Aryan is a name that you use for respectable, eminently respectable people. Those are the followers of Vedic culture are the Aryans. So we find the word in the Gita. Krishna tells Arjuna not to be a non-Aryan. The Buddha was the Aryaputra, son of an Aryan. So I took it that way, but actually that was a mistake. And the telltale sign should have been it's Arya, feminine noun, not Arya, masculine noun. If it had been referring to Kapila, it would have been a masculine noun. And masculine ending nouns are short in Sanskrit. If it's a long ending noun like Radha, then if it's a long it must be referring to a female. So what's it referring to then? And I didn't know this, but it's the name of a meter. It's actually the name of the meter. And I said that the Karikas were not in meter. right? Sutras are typically not in meter. But one of our fellow students here, Marcia, pointed out that it's not in the regular, it's not in a meter like the shloka meter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is counted by syllables. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre, 8 syllables. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yayutsavaha. Right, first verse of the Gita, 8, 8, 8, 8. That's the shloka. But there are other different kinds of meters, and one of them is the matrika, where the count is not on the syllables, but on whether a phoneme is heavy or light. We don't need to get into that, but very quickly, if it's a long vowel, it's heavy. If it's a vowel before a conjunct, it's heavy. So rather than count by syllables, it's counted by, it's called matrika. And one of the matrika meters is called the arya. So all of which is to say that the reference, the third sentence or paragraph on page 36, that reference to arya that I thought was a namaha to Kapila, who was an arya, a very eminently respectable person. It's not at all. This arya is being introduced as a reference to the kind of meter being used in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā. I'm sure most of you may not be interested in that, but I just wanted to set the record straight. And thanks to Marcia Solomon for pointing that out. Marcia, are you with us? Don't be bashful. Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Well done, Marcia.
I'm disappearing. And thank you, Edwin.
Thank you. Yeah, very awesome. Thank you. Okay, we got up to what? I think we're on 10, yes? We're not going to read all of Gaudapada because I want to sort of get through this Vyakta Avyakta business and get onto the Purusha and then get onto the Gunas and then other things that might be, I don't feel we can cover every single Karika. Maybe we can if we stretch it on. It all depends on the interest level. But quickly before we start, thanks to Bob Gilbo, old friend of mine from New York City, who actually did the Sāṃkhya chart for the Yoga Sutras. In fact, he edited the whole book. I'm very grateful to him. So here's the Sāṃkhya chart. Go into all this business about Vyakta, Avyakta, and the Purusha. Click on the Sāṃkhya chart, everybody, for a moment. It's in the chat. Okay, it says Sāṃkhya chart Gilbo. Everybody bring it up on your screens for 1 minute. I'll do that. Right, here it is. Okay, this is the Sāṃkhya, this is Sāṃkhya Metaphysics. If you were to, this is metaphysics. It's also psychology because we're dealing with the mind. But at this point, we're looking at it from the point of view of metaphysics. Right, so if you were to dissolve the whole universe into its, keep dissolving till you can't dissolve, reduce the table in front of you into its atoms, reduce the atoms into their tanmatras, keep reducing. What do you end up with? At what point is it the fact that you reach some entities that are irreducible? Buddhism
Edwin, could you share the screen because we can't see it?
It's in the chat. It's in the chat box. I tried before class to put it up on the screen. I couldn't figure out how to do it, even with Bob's help. Can't you, Rosa, can't you click on go in the chat? Can you see the Sāṃkhya chart?
I just posted it again at the bottom of the chat. It's about 4 chats up from the bottom now. It's a file. It says Sāṃkhya chart gilbo.pdf. If you click to open that, you should be able to view it.
Rosa, can you do it?
I'm sorry, I don't see the link.
Not coming up.
It's there. I see it.
If you go into chat.
Yes, I got it now.
I see it.
Rosa, you got it?
Nope.
Rosa, it's in his book, Yoga Sutra book.
Do you have the Yoga Sutras there, Rosa?
Yeah, I'll grab it. What page?
It's on page Roman numeral L.
Okay.
Okay, so quickly then, before we start, just so we've been talking about, remember, the text starts, is because of the threefold suffering that we desire to know. Why? All known means fail, right? We're familiar with that. And then the Karika, I keep saying sutra, the Karika says, well, if you really want to avoid suffering, by the way, everybody have your Yoga Sutra books handy as well for a second. I want to connect this to the Yoga Sutras before we proceed. If you really want to, ultimately be free of deep level suffering, not just temporarily, you need to know the difference between the vyakta, the avyakta, what this translation is calling the manifest, the unmanifest, and the spirit. Awful term, but okay, now look on the chart. So you have the Purusha on the far left. This translation is calling that the spirit. See how it's not connected to anything? It's completely aloof, autonomous, independent, had no arrows coming out of it, not connected to anything. On the right, you have Prakriti, which this text calls pradhana. And if you look on the far right, that's the avyakta, it's unmanifest. What does unmanifest mean? Nothing's coming out of it when it's in its primordial, pre-creative state. And obviously it can't be perceived because the senses and the powers of the senses are not evolved yet. It can't be, there's no mind. It's inferred. As a matter of fact, this text calls it the inferred one. And in fact, we're going to read some verses today where the arguments are going to be presented as to how is it being inferred? What are the grounds for this inference that there is this thing called Prakriti? But for now, so that's the avyakta. Now, everything else on the far right, you see the vyakta, that everything coming out of Prakriti is vyakta. It begins to manifest things, starting with Buddhi, which is also known as Mahat. In this text, it's called Mahat. So Mahat is the first evolute. It evolves out of Prakriti. And then from the Buddhi comes various things. Comes basically the ego, the Ahamkara on the left. And it has a sattvic Ahamkara, a tejas Ahamkara, and a tamasic one. And from these, then you get the mind. And the powers of the senses, the shaktis. Some texts call them the pranas, the 10 pranas, the 10 shaktis that facilitate the workings of the indriyas. The Gyanendriyas here are called Buddhi Indriyas. Gyanendriyas elsewhere. Indriya is a instrument. So there's Buddhi Indriyas and Karma Indriyas. There are Indriyas, instruments. Buddhi, of knowledge. So hearing and touching and seeing and tasting, and that's how we know it. That's the empirical mode of knowing through the senses. And then there's karma. Karma means action. So karma indriyas are the organs of action. So they are speech and the hands, ability to grasp, the feet, that's locomotion, and then the excreting and the generative organs, procreation. These are the organs of action. And then from the tamasic ahankara come the 5 subtle vibrational qualities associated with the objects, the objects of the senses. So the ear hears sound, the skin experiences touch, the eyes form, and so on, the 5. And then from these subtle vibrational qualities, we get the gross subatomic particles associated with ether, although that's not a particle. Or perhaps it is in Samkhya, but it's not in the other schools. It's all pervading. And then wind, fire, water, air. I don't know. I suppose we could say solids and liquids and energies and gases, perhaps, if we wanted to use modern frame of references. That's a job for somebody else to do, is to see if this in any way maps onto anything physics is talking about. Because you could, if you were to pursue that kind of a project of seeing if this can map onto modern physics, then you'd have subatomic particles on the right, but they're coming from subtler, and maybe the strings would, I don't know, there's someone that more knowledgeable than me would have to see if this works. But the tan matras are vibrational qualities associated with the objects of the senses. But these come from ego, and ego comes from intelligence, and intelligence comes from Prakriti. So this is your Sāṃkhya chart. I'm sure you've seen it in the back of your yoga books, and probably just kind of vaguely looked at it and sort of wondered, it looks a bit archaic perhaps in its metaphysics, but it may be far more profound than it seems to be when we just look at it and just see, well, the, grasping instruments and, space wind. It sounds like something from, I don't know, Aristotle or something. But this may just be a way of looking at it, which may, rather than being right or wrong, it could just be a way of looking at the same reality that physics looks at. But someone needs to try to sort of really enter deeply into making a comparison. And I don't have a physics background, so that person wouldn't be me. But hopefully someone like Siegfried, who's with us perhaps, or he was with us, that would be an interesting project for someone with a physics background. So now, for the purpose of our reading now, the three terms we're looking at the very top, the top. Purusha on the left, Prakriti, which this text calls the Pradhana, and it's the Avyakta. There's only one Avyakta, that's Prakriti. But the Vyakta is everything else. So Buddhi is Vyakta, Ahamkara is Vyakta, the five Buddhindriyas are Vyaktas. Everything else on that list, that would be what, 20 plus the mind, 21 plus Buddhi, that's 22. All of that's Vyakta. They're different, they're just different stages of Vyakta. They're manifestations from Prakriti. They manifest in different stages. And the unmanifest is Prakriti itself. It cannot be perceived, but this text is going to say it can be inferred, as can the Purusha. Okay, does that help a little bit? Hopefully that helps. So you can keep that handy if you wish, and on we go. Corrections made, and the chart is there. Okay, so I believe we got up to verse 10. Did we do 10 last time? Anybody?
We did not.
We didn't. We did 9 though, didn't we?
Yes.
Right. So verse 10 on page 69. And this, I find, this is a little bit, I'm hoping we can get through this Vyakta Avyakta business. I don't know how interesting it is to you. It gets a little bit. So we'll skip through some of the commentary because some of it's repetitive, and we don't have that much time. So the manifest. Now we know what the manifest is. The Vyakta, the evolved. It evolves from Prakriti, and it's caused. It's caused. It is an effect. That which is caused is an effect. So it is caused is another word for saying it's an effect. It's not eternal, right? It merges back into Prakriti at some point at the end of the cosmic cycles. It's non-pervasive. It doesn't pervade everything because these vyaktas are limited. Although the Buddhi, let's not get into this, but in Patanjali anyway, the Buddhi is potentially all-pervading, but let's not complicate things. So it's non-pervasive, it's mobile. When things emerge, there's movement out of Prakriti, and if something evolves out of something else, there's movement involved for it to be an evolute. So it's mobile, it's manifold. It's not one thing. There's earth, water, air, fire. These are all different things. It's manifold, lots of different forms. It's dependent because it's coming from Prakriti. So it's not independent. If something evolves from something else, like yogurt is dependent on milk, it's not its own thing. It comes from milk. So it's dependent. It's mergent. It merges back into Prakriti at the end of the cycle. It's conjunct. Things come together in conjunctions. Once you have differences, then there's a possibility of conjunction between one thing and another thing. Right? In Prakriti, so everything is merged, so there's no conjunction in Prakriti. But when different things emerge, then there's the possibility of contact. And it's governed, it's controlled. Okay? So that's all the manifest. All of those features, he's going to go through them one by one. So if you find this a little pedantic, we can jump forward 2 or 3 Karikas and get to the Purusha. Okay, so if you're finding this a little bit too tedious, just, I don't know how you're going to let me know, but you can throw something in the chat, and if enough of you say, okay, enough of this, move on, then we could do that. So the unmanifest, the unevolved, it doesn't evolve from anything. It's the ultimate cause. It itself is the final stop sign. So it is the reverse of all of that. It's the opposite of all of those things in the list. Now, you may be becoming familiar with commentarial tradition now. The verse gives if it gives a list, what do the commentators do? They go through and explain each and every member of the list. That is typical commentarial. Same with the Yoga Sutras, right? 5 Rittis. Commentators go through them all. 5 Kleshas. Patanjali himself goes, lists them, and then the commentators expand on it. That's the business of a commentator to, if there's a list, to unpack it. Before we continue, could I just make a connection with the Yoga Sutras here? You have your Yoga Sutras, my friends. Go to 2:16. Everybody pull out your Yoga Sutras for a second, all right? Let's make the connection. Right? Remember, these are not 2 different schools. They're the same thing. It's just that Samkhya focuses more on knowledge, and yoga gives more of a, take the knowledge and then presents a technique to experience that knowledge, that which Samkhya has established through its metaphysics. Okay, now, what was the first couple of verses of the Karikas? Was it because of suffering? We desire to know, all known means have failed. And then the second or third Karika, what is the cause of suffering? The known means have failed. They're not the cause then. What is the known mean? What's the real reason of cause of suffering? How do we become free? What's the ultimate way of becoming free from suffering? Is to know the manifest, unmanifest, and the Purusha. Yes? Manifest, unmanifest, Purusha. Now, go to 2:15. This comes after 2:12, 13, 14, where Patanjali says, look, there's, different kinds of jati ayurboga. In verse 13, he speaks about the type of birth that you get, the family or species you're born into, span of life, and your quality of life. And then 14, he says, and they're either pleasure-bearing or distressful fruits, depending on whether their causes were pious or impious, or dharmic or adharmic. And then in 15, Patanjali says, you know what? For a Vivekinaha, they're all suffering. It's all suffering, exactly the same as we found in the Karika. Even the best possible birth. Remember, what was the Purvapaksha, the opposing point of view in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā? 2 Purvapakshas. One is, we can fix suffering by known means, by good food and good company and medicine. And then the second Purvapaksha was, even if that fails, we can fix suffering by celestial realms. We'll do our Vedic rituals to go to the celestial realm. Patanjali is saying the same thing here. Even the best birth, right? In verse 14, it's subject to suffering. Then he says 16, but it can be avoided, future suffering. 17, well, what's the cause of suffering then? Exactly the same as the Karika. It's the coming together of the seer and the seen. Samkhya just using different terms. Samkhya says the Purusha and the Avyakta and the Vyakta, but that's the seen. The Vyakta is the seen. Just different terminology, but they're identifying the same cause. The same ultimate cause of suffering is the Drashtra Drishyayoho Samyogaha, the coming together of the seer and the seen. And how do we get free of it? How do we get free of it? Go over the page of Patanjali 24. What is the real cause of conjunction between these two? Avidya. How do we get rid of it? 26, Viveka, or 25. When this coming together, Tadabhavat, Samyoga Bhavo, Hanam, Tadrashahe Kevalyam. When the coming together is removed, then freedom. When ignorance is removed, coming together, the conjunction between the seer and the seen, the Purusha and the Prakriti is removed. Freedom. That's Kevalya, a term we're going to see in the Karikas. And how do you get that? How do you remove this avidya? 26 viveka kyati. You get viveka. And what's viveka? Knowledge. What does Sāṃkhya say? Knowledge of the seer and the manifest, the unmanifest, and the seer, and the difference between them. It's exactly the same thing. So how are they different? Well, go down to 29, not so much different, but 29, then Patanjali says, how do you get this viveka? Yoganganushthanad. You follow the limbs of yoga, then he lists them, and then there's a whole discussion about the limbs. So Patanjali's method of removing this conjunction between the seer and the seen is yogic practice. Whereas Sāṃkhya is more kind of jnana oriented, just knowledge oriented. It doesn't reject this at all. You could even say that Sāṃkhya is providing the knowledge, more precise knowledge about the nature of the seen. The vyakta and avyakta is getting into all of this discussion, so we're very, very clear about what the seen is. And then Patanjali steps in and says, okay, you got that all sorted out? You clear about your metaphysics? You clear about the source of suffering? Right? The way he puts it, drashta drishayaho samyogaha, coming together of the seer and the seen. Clear about that? Okay, now I give you a method. So it's not two different things. It's just Patanjali is piggybacking or emerging from the Sāṃkhya metaphysics. And Sāṃkhya is going to be more focused, at least in this text, on the actual ingredients of the scene. Okay, you see the connection between the texts? Okay, so now we're on 10. Let's read it. Yes. So let's go into the commentary, which would be on page 67. So, Bhāsha commentary. It was said that dissimilar and similar with the nature. How is that? That is explained. So the Purusha is dissimilar and similar with Prakriti. And he's going to explain how it's dissimilar and how it's similar with Prakriti. Right. That's what he's going to explain. Okay, where did he say that? Where did he say Purusha is similar? Dissimilar, which verse was that? Oh, I don't know. Somewhere he said it. Maybe he's, yeah. Say it coming up. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so the manifest, right? Vyakta. Effects like the Mahat, that's Buddhi, and the rest, all of those 22 things on the chart. It has a cause. Hetumat, that's a Sanskrit word in the Karika, and the Gaudapada is explaining that's what a commentator does. He gives synonyms for words in the sutra or the Karika. So you'll give synonyms. Okay, so Hetumat, what does it mean? Hetumat's in the verse, possessing a cause. What does it mean? It means that which has a cause. And then he gives a list. The words upadana, hetu, karana, nimitta, they're all synonyms. So if you knew Sanskrit, say, maybe you didn't know what one of the words meant, but you'd know the others. So these are all different kinds of causes. Upadana is the material cause. Okay, so a pot made of clay. What's the material cause? A lump of clay. And then nimitta is the instrumental cause. The potter's wheel, it doesn't matter, they're all causes. They contribute to the production of an effect. So the manifest has the nature as its cause. The manifest is caused from the unmanifest, right? The top of that chart, the unmanifest, that's Prakriti herself. So the manifest as Prakriti as its cause. Hence, the manifest, the vyakta, all the way up to the gross elements, all the 22 items on the list, they're all caused. Intellect, right, the first thing that evolves from Prakriti, has as its cause nature. Remember, wherever it says nature here, the word is in Sanskrit is Prakriti. Let's use the word Prakriti instead of nature. We'll use the word Purusha instead of spirit. So the intelligence, Buddhi, has its cause nature. Ego has its cause the intellect, right? Just on the chart, the 5 subtle elements and the 11 organs are possessed of a cause through the ego. They all emerge from ego. And we don't have to read all of this. The ether has a cause in the subtle element of sound, the wind in the subtle element of touch. Okay, and those are all the little arrows, one thing going into another. So the thing at the beginning of the arrow is the cause, and the thing at the end of the arrow is the effect. That's all. So that's number one in the translation. Keep your eye on the translation, right? The manifest, the evolved is caused, number one. Non-eternal, number two. I'm looking at the translation again. Non-pervasive, number three. Mobile, number four. Manifold, 5. Dependent, 6. Mergent, 7. Conjunct, 8. And governed, 9. So there's 9 characteristics of the Vyakta in the verse. He's going to go through them one by one. If you want to write in little numbers, you can. So number one is, it has a cause, and he explains, just a glance at your chart, and you'll see that everything is caused except nature herself, except Prakriti. So let's go to the second reason. So go down about 10 lines on the right, page 67. Further, maybe 11 lines. It's non-eternal. This is number 2 in the Karika. Why is it non-eternal? Because it's produced from another. If something's produced from something else, well, it can go back into that thing then. So it's not eternal. A pot is produced from clay, but you can break it, smash it up, and it goes back to clay again. So anything that's produced can be unproduced by definition. So therefore, number 2, further, it is non-eternal since it is produced from another. Just as a jar is produced from a lump of clay and is non-eternal. Remember, the jar is always going to be the example given. Very frequently, whenever we want to talk about an object, it's a pot, really. Kamba. Right. Clear? Number 3. The third thing keep your eye on the translation, right? If you hold it like this, you can keep your eye on the translation while you're reading the commentary. So, number 3 in the translation. It's non-pervasive. So here it is. Further, it's not all-pervading, non-extensive, just as the nature and the spirit, the Prakriti and the spirit, the Purusha are all-pervading. Prakriti is meaning they're infinite. They pervade everything. Purusha is 2, but not the Vyakta. When things evolve, they're limited. They're limited evolutes. They're not all-pervading, because if they were all-pervading, they'd be the same as their cause. There'd be no difference between the effect and the cause. If the effect is all-pervading and if the cause is all-pervading, the effect is all-pervading, then they're the same thing. So anything emerging out of something else is not going to be, from a Sāṃkhya point of view, it's not all-pervading. Third, number 4. Moreover, it is active, since it migrates at the time of creation. When creation takes place, he's using the term migrates. It's probably not a great translation, but it moves out of Prakriti. It emerges. So therefore it's action involved. Prior to creation, there's no action. The minute there's action, then things churn and things come out, just like you churn milk. If there's no action, milk just sits on the stove. It's just milk. But then you churn it, like in the old-fashioned way, and then because of that action, then something evolves. Yogurt comes out of it. So therefore, it is active since it migrates, meaning it moves out of something. It emerges is a better word. It emerges at the time of creation, along with the subtle body, invested with the 13 organs. It migrates and therefore is active. Maybe he's talking about reincarnation here as well. It's moving. When we die, the entire subtle body goes into the next body. The only thing that goes back into Prakriti is the gross body, the 5 elements. But the intelligence, the ego, the mind, and the powers behind the 10 indriyas. So that when it says the 13 organs, what's it talking about? Look at your chart. Buddhi, intelligence, ego, then on the far left, the mind, and the 5 Gyanindriyas or Buddhi Indriyas and the Karma Indriyas. All those are powers, they're Shaktis, they're pranas. the subtle body, the antakarana, the sukshma sharira, lots of names for it, linga, at least 3 I can think of on the top of my head, but there's more. That entire subtle body migrates into the next body. The only thing that stays behind is the flesh and the meat and the 5 gross elements. So moreover, it is active. Remember what we're talking about with the vyakta, the manifest. It's active. Why? Since it migrates at the time of creation. Along with the subtle body invested with the 13-fold organs. Now you know why it's 13-fold. It migrates and therefore is active. Next thing on the list, number 5. Next thing in the Karika. It's manifold. Well, obviously, there's 22 different things, so it's manifold. Intellect, ego, the 5 subtle elements, 11 organs, 5 gross elements, the one thing is different from another in one sense, although they're fundamentally the same. They're all sattva, rajas, and tamas. On one level, they're the same. But once they emerge, they're manifold. Number 6, further, it's dependent. The evolutes are not independent. They're dependent on the cause, Prakriti. Yoga is dependent on milk. You can't have yoga without milk. Yoga's not independent. It's dependent on milk. Ghee is dependent on milk. So it's dependent. Intellect depends on nature, on the Prakriti itself. Each evolute depends on the previous evolute. So ego depends upon intellect. The 11 organs and 5 subtle elements depend upon ego. And the 5 gross elements depend on the 5 subtle elements. Okay, so ticking up. Okay, what else? It's mergent. What does that mean? It has a property of merging. What does that mean? At the time of dissolution, at the end of the universe, right, which I think lasts like 14 billion years, something like that. Yeah. I think physicists say Big Bang was, 8 billion years ago? And the Puranas say each cosmic cycle lasts 14 billion years. But anyway, what happens at the end of the cycle? It is mergent. It has the property of merging. At the time of dissolution, when the end of the creative cycle, I think there's there was anyway, a discussion amongst physicists whether the Big Bang would just, always keep, expanding out, or whether at some point it would be a collapse. It would reach its ultimate end, and then it would just kind of like somehow implode. And that was a position that was defended. I don't know if it's so much of a normative position anymore, but but that's what the Puranas would say. The Sāṃkhya would say, yes, it implodes, and everything then goes back to its matrix. So there'd be the reverse of the Big Bang. If we wanted to sort of map this onto a Big Bang, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that because these are different sources of knowledge. But at some point there has to be these conversations. So, but anyway, it's mergent. It has the property of merging at the time of dissolution, the end of the creative cycle, 14 billion years. What happens? 5 elements merge into subtle elements, 11 organs into the ego, etc. Everything goes back into its cause. And the ego in the intellect back into nature, Prakriti. Right, what's next on the list? Parts. It's possessed of parts, right? So you have parts. You have sound, touch, taste. These are all different parts. What else? It's governed. It's not self-dependent. Since the intellect is subordinate, it's governed by Prakriti. And each one is governed by the thing before it. The thing before it controls it, determines its nature. And the nature of an evolute, that its nature is governed by its cause. An effect is governed by the nature of the cause. So therefore, and he gives the list. Okay, jumping down 4 lines. In this manner is explained the subordinate dependent manifest. He said, okay, now we've discussed the vyakta. Okay, we're done with it now, he says. Now we will explain the unmanifest. He says, okay, we've talked about remember, keep your eye on the ball. How do you get free of suffering? You have to know the difference between the Purusha, the vyakta, and the avyakta. Always keep your eye on that ball. It's like Patanjali, you got to keep your eye on the ball. What is yoga? Chitta, vritti, nirodha. Everything else is connected to that that definition and that project, chitta, vritti, nirodha. Always got to keep your eye on the ball. Why are the siddhis there in chapter 3? Well, because because you can get siddhis from chitta, vritti, nirodha. right? What's Kriya Yoga in chapter 2? Well, you have to do the Kriyas if you want to make the mind sattvic enough to Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So everything in the Yoga Sutras is connected to that definition of yoga. And yoga is the way to be free of suffering. So here, the entire text is, always keep your eye on the ball. It's an exposition, an elaboration on three things. Purusha, that he calls spirit. Prakriti, that he calls the unmanifest. And everything, and the vyakta, the manifest, which emerges from the unmanifest. Everything in this text is a discussion of those three things. And now, 5 lines down on page 68, now we'll explain the unmanifest. Now we know what the manifest is it's governed, it's supported, it's mergent, it's active, all those 9 characteristics. But what about the avyakta then? The unmanifest is the reverse, opposite, i.e. just the reverse of these very qualities mentioned. All of those 9 things, none of them exist in the unmanifest. There is nothing higher than the nature. So the first thing on the list, which was that it's caused. There's nothing higher than the nature, therefore the nature is not produced. It doesn't have a cause. Hence the unmanifest without a cause. Second thing, again, the manifest is not eternal, but the unmanifest is eternal. So so keep your eye on the ball. The manifest is the opposite of the unmanifest in some ways. There's going to be commonality. The both of them are made of the 3 gunas. But now he's talking about the differences. So the manifest is, okay, the manifest is not eternal, right? All of those evolutes, eventually they merge back in, but the unmanifest is eternal since it's not produced. If something is never produced, it has no beginning then. If it has no beginning, then what's going to make it come to an end? So nature meaning Prakriti, is not produced from anything else, unlike the gross elements, so it's eternal. Again, the manifest is not extensive. It doesn't pervade everything because each thing is individual. The manifest is not extensive or all-pervading, but the unmanifest is all-pervading. Why? Because it's omnipresent. It pervades everything. Do we need to read the whole thing? He's basically going to say the unmanifest is the opposite of the manifest. Are we okay? I think we can go move on. What do you say?
Yes.
Yes. So all of the things in the list in Karika 10, the 9 things, right? Non-eternal, non-pervasive, mobile, manifold, dependent, mergent, conjunct, and governed. That all pertains to the vyakta, but the avyakta is the reverse. And he's just going to go through the list and say, it is eternal, it is pervasive, it is not mobile, it is not manifold, it is not dependent, it doesn't merge, it doesn't conjunct, and it's not governed. That's all. That's verse 10. Verse 11.
But it is still discussing Prakriti. He's not going to Purusha yet.
No, I know. That's why I want to get to Purusha. We'll get there in two Karikas. Right now, he's talking about the manifest and the unmanifest. Karika 11, page 74. Ready? The manifest, which is the evolved, is composed of the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. The constituents, and it's indiscriminative, objective, common, non-intelligent, and productive. The pradhana is also like this. The Purusha, though similar, is yet the reverse of these. So the Purusha is going to be discriminative. It's not going to be objective. It's not going to be common. It is going to be intelligent, by which he means conscious, chaitana, and it's not going to be productive. Do we want to go through this? He's going to do the same thing. He's going to list everything, and I don't want to, if this is getting tedious, then we can move on to the Purusha verse, but let's just have a little look at it. Okay.
Quick look is good.
Pardon? Well,
Quick look will be good.
Yeah, we'll see how everybody feels. You're welcome to, you're welcome to post, if you want me to jump a bit, let me know in the chat. So verse
Yes, jump.
Pardon?
Yes, jump.
All right, let's jump. Is everybody okay with me jumping? I don't want to lose you all.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. But we will read the verse about the okay, let's just see what he has to say about the gunas. A little bit more interesting, I think. So go to verse number 12 on page 78. The gunas, right? We've all heard of the sattva, rajas, and tamas. Let's see. And if you're interested in the Gita, you'll find discussion of these in chapter 14 of the Bhagavad Gita. More or less the whole chapter, the whole of 17, more or less, and the first half of 18. Let's see what the Karikas say about the gunas. Translation on page 76. The constituents, the gunas, are of the nature of pleasure, pain, and infatuation. Sattva provides pleasure, happiness, material happiness, not the bliss of Atman, but when the mind is sattvic, it's peaceful and it's content and it's happy. What about rajas? Rajas produces pain. Rajas constantly seeks happiness through desire, through chasing desire, right? Rajas and raga, it's the same word, same root. But a rajasic person is always miserable and frustrated because it never attains. So that's pain. And what about tamas? Infatuation or delusion, bewilderment. So these three serve to illumine, that's sattva, to actuate, rajas, to make things happen, to provide energy, and to restrain. So things that have solidity, the very fact that we have forms, something is restraining Prakriti into the shape of a book. Why doesn't it just melt or spill into this? Well, because tamas is the one that restrains. It's one of its functions, or demarcates. Okay. So what do they do? So where are we? 12. And what do they do, these gunas? They serve to illumine, to actuate, and to restrain. They mutually domineer. They compete. When you're trying to be sattvic, you're trying to make your sattva dominant. Rajas is complaining away. Rajas is trying to compete. Rajas is trying to disturb your sattva. You're trying to meditate, and then Rajas comes up in the mind and wants a coffee or wants action or get up or do something. So they're competing. Meditation is a very, you can really see these gunas at play. And what else is competing when you're meditating? Tamas. Tamas is like, oh, it's too early, go back to sleep, don't be a fanatic, have another little nap, get back to your meditation in an hour. Tamas, okay? So therefore, they mutually domineer, rest on each other, produce each other, consort together, they're always in a dance, and they're reciprocally present all the time. These three gunas are interacting and competing for prominence. Okay, this might be an interesting bhasha. So we go to page 75. Okay, a little bit better for you. Are we okay with this? Verse.
Well, I do have a question, Edwin.
Yeah.
You said that the gunas are in the unmanifest, and how is that possible?
What is the unmanifest? It's nothing other than the three gunas in a state of latency.
Okay.
Where do the three gunas come from? Everything has to come from the unmanifest. If we're going to say the gunas don't come from the unmanifest, where do they come from? Somewhere else then? Well, what's that something else?
From mind.
So what the difference between the manifest and the unmanifest, the difference is that in the manifest, the gunas are active and competing and domineering. Whereas in the unmanifest, they're in a state of neutrality. Really what's happening is Rajas is neutralizing, tamas is neutralizing Rajas. There's no action, there's no movement, so there's no churning of the milk, so no yogurt is emerging. There's no churning of the gunas. Rajas is neutralized, because Rajas is really, I'm going to mute you all again, because Rajas is the one that stirs in the first place. So the gunas are latent in the unmanifest. Prakriti is the three gunas. It's not that Prakriti is something else. Well, if Prakriti is not the three gunas, then what the heck is Prakriti then? It's nothing other than the three gunas. Otherwise, if you're going to say Prakriti is something else, and then what? And then the three gunas emerge in the Vyakta. What, number one, where do they come from? Number two, what is Prakriti then? If it's not the three gunas, it's something else. Well, there's no description of anything else. It is the three gunas. So let's read the Bhashya. It has been said, right, in one of these Karikas, that the manifest and the unmanifest, the Vyakta and the Avyakta, are possessed of the three gunas. He has attributes, we'll use the word gunas, to explain these gunas and their nature, right? Let's explain, right? The meaning is that the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, are of the essence. What essences do they have, right? The essence of the sun is light and heat. That's the essence. When you talk about the sun, you say, what's the sun? We say, the essence is essentially it is light and heat. So what's the essence of the gunas? Okay, well, sattva is of the nature of priti, pleasure. Not to be confused with the ananda of the Atman, it's a completely different thing. But when we're sattvic, we're pleasant, we're content, we're happy, we're peaceful. So sattva is of the nature of priti, pleasure. Having that as the nature, sattvic people are happy people. We live in a culture that makes us think that to be happy you have to be rajasic and accumulate and chase your desires. This is an avidya society. A vidya society emphasizes detachment and simplicity and so forth. So, what about rajas? Rajas is of the nature of apriti, the opposite. Priti is when you put an in front of a noun in Sanskrit, it's the opposite. Vidya, avidya. So apriti, but that's pain. When we're very rajasic, we're miserable, we're driven, we're tormented, we can't fulfill our desires, however hard we try. So that's pain. What about tamas? Tamas is the nature of vishada, delusion. When we're in tamasic, we're just completely deluded. Krishna says you take dharma to be adharma and adharma to be dharma, delusion. Again, these gunas are adopted to illuminate sattva, to activate rajas, and to restrain, another way of thinking about them. Whenever there's illumination, perception, the mind is very sattvic. All cognitive functionings are highly sattvic. And any kind of activity, even blinking, look, I'm blinking my eyelids, that's rajas. So that's activation. Any kind of movement is rajas. And to restrain, when there's restraint, solidity, now it's winter, it's a tamasic time, everything is restrained, the sap goes down to the roots, this is all tamas. The word artha in the Karika, what's the purpose, what's the nature, is expressive of capacity, power. The sattva has, what's the power of each of these? What's its capacity? What's its nature? The sattva has its artha. What's its artha? Its purpose, its capacity, its power. What is it? Illumination means that it's competent to illuminate. So all, as I said, cognitive functions, perception, even in physical things, the more luminous something is, light itself, is more sattva in it. The sense is that rajas is adapted to activate and tamas to restrain, to fix a thing. It would fix it. Otherwise, if everything was rajas, it would just be fiery movement all over the place. Nothing would be solid or fixed. You'd have no solidity. So that's tamas. Thus, the gunas are of the nature of illumination, activity, and fixture, the three gunas. Again, these mutually suppress, right? So when we sleep, then tamas takes over the mind. It suppresses sattva and rajas. In deep sleep, nidra, one of the vrittis of Patanjali, that's tamas is maximized. So they suppress, they support. Okay, so rajas might be in yoga, you have to use rajas when you want to do your asanas, and you're supporting sattva. You're trying to get to a place of sattva, but you're using rajas to, whatever it is, to control the mind, to practice, to do your practices. So they support, they produce, they consort, and they exist. Right, he's going to go through them. They are described as mutually suppressive, mutually supporting, mutually productive, mutually consorting, and mutually existing. What does all that mean? Well, mutually suppressive means they overcome one another. right? When we want to meditate, we want sattva to overcome rajas and tamas. That's the goal. And then we can fix our minds. But at sleep, we want to get to sleep. We don't want to be, when it's time to go to bed, you want to get to sleep. And if you're restless, that's no good. So you want tamas to overpower rajas and sattva. You want to close down your senses. You want to close down perception. So at that point, you want tamas to be dominant. So mutually suppressive, that's what it means. They suppress each other, means they overcome one another, and they becoming manifest with the characteristics of pleasure, pain. Just as, okay, when sattva dominates, what happens? What happens when sattva dominates? Then at that time, dominating over or suppressing, another way of saying you dominate, well, you're suppressing rajas and tamas with its characteristics. So the characteristics of sattva become dominant, suppressing the characteristics of rajas and tamas, action and inertia, with its characteristics. And then what happens? It manifests itself as pleasure and illumination, happiness, contentment. Rajas starts to stir, all of a sudden the mind becomes distressed and anxious and agitated and tormented, and it needs this and it needs that, and I haven't done this and I haven't done that. That's a rajasic mind, always never at peace. Always thinking there's something to do, something to do, something to do. I shouldn't be sitting here. There's something to do. So that's rajas. Do you relate to that? When we're rajasic, we're always thinking that there's something. We're never at peace. We're always thinking I should be doing something. I should be doing something. There's this nagging feeling. That's a rajasic mind. Always this impulse. I should be working. Should be doing. Okay, so when rajas dominates, then what happens? The sattva and tamas, it does so with its characteristics of pain and activity. Pain, dukkham doesn't just mean physical pain. It means, frustration. It means always somehow feeling that you're missing something, you're lacking something, you should be doing something. The sense of malaise, ill-at-easeness, incompleteness. These are symptoms of rajas. I know them very well, my friends. I was born rajasic, and thank God for yoga. When tamas dominates the sattva and rajas, then it does so through its characteristic of delusion and fixture. We get deluded, we invent nonsense, just delusions in our mind, fantasy. These are all tamas. And fixture, stability. So they are mutually productive. And also tamas can be also very myopic. One, just tribalism, all of these isms, racism, sex, that's just tamas, where we don't recognize commonality, my block, my neighborhood, my tribe. So it delimits, it fixes, it encloses. So that's all tamas. The more narrow-minded we are, the more tamasic we are. Rajas is our places to go, people to meet, always restless, always running around. What's next? What's the next flavor? What's the latest thing? What's going on? That's rajas, right? Only sattva produces happiness. Think of that, because we've grown up thinking rajas will give us happiness, that we need to accumulate, make money, and chase after desires, then we'll be happy. So this is a very different model of what, and we're not talking about the bliss of Atman. Keep that in mind. We're just talking about mundane mental bliss. Not bliss, the contentment, priti, happiness. Okay, so further, the attributes are mutually supporting. They support each other like a binary. They're mutually productive, just as a lump of clay produces a jar. Right, so a better example it gives later on is the lamp. So you have the wick, you have the oil, you have the flame, and they mutually support each other. They're different things. The lamp itself, the flame, the wick, the oil, but they all work together to produce illumination. So I think that comes a bit late. That's a very typical Sāṃkhya example. So what else? I think we can skip. Oh, but there's a nice thing. Go down to right after Bhagavad Gita 3:28. About 10 lines from the end of the paragraph. Here's a really interesting little example. How the same thing can be a cause of sattva to one person, rajas to another person, and tamas to another person. He gives the example of a beautiful and virtuous woman. So she's a source of delight to all, because she's beautiful and virtuous and dharmic, right? We all love to see beautiful, righteous, everybody appreciates a righteous, good karma kind of individual. And she herself is the cause of pain to her co-wives. So to some people, they see her, they create sattva in the mind of some. But of course, this is back then when, kings had more than one wife, just like they did everywhere in the world. But she might cause pain to her co-wives. Maybe she's favored. So the same person which causes sattva to some people is causing rajas to others because they want to be primary, whatever, wives. And again, she herself produces delusion in the passionate, in the manner, right? She causes delusion. People fantasize about, perhaps being with a woman like that. So but the point is, the same woman can, and he's trying to give I don't know, maybe this is a really bad example, but that's the example. The same thing can cause sattva in one context, rajas in another, and tamas in another. Or what else? Let's look at the king. Maybe that's a better example. Jump down a couple of lines. Just as a king, assiduous in protecting his people and punishing the wicked, the same king produces pleasure in good people because they want to have a dharmic king and they want to be protected. So it's pleasurable for good people, and pain and delusion in the wicked. So he's just trying to give examples. In this manner, rajas produces sattva and tamas. The first example of the beautiful woman was how sattva can produce rajas and tamas. Here's an example of how rajas can produce sattva and tamas. So each of them can produce the other. They're mutually interdependent and supportive. And now what about tamas? How does tamas bring about the other two? Well, in a similar manner, tamas brings about the existence of sattva and rajas, but by its own nature of covering. So for example, the clouds covering the sky, that's tamas, because tamas covers. But they cause happiness to the world because they bring rain. So here, or a good sleep brings happiness. They urge the farmer to activate by their rain. So they also produce rajas in the farmer. The rajas says, "Oh, good, it's raining. Let me get out and work the fields." And they produce delusion in the lovers in separation. The lovers want to meet in the forest. It's going to rain. Oh, so they're deluded. So these are just examples. I don't know if they're helpful. He's just trying to say how one guna can produce the other two. And he's given 3 examples. How sattva can produce rajas and tamas with the beautiful woman, can produce, rajas in the co-wives and tamas in those who, fantasize about her. So that's sattva producing rajas, tamas. Then how about rajas? Well, rajas, like the king, can produce sattva in the good. They're happy because of the king, but it produces tamas in the wicked. Second example. Third one, tamas. What about tamas? Well, tamas, like the rain, it can produce sattva, because it's rain and, we want rain, and it can produce, tamas is a covering of the sky. It produces sattva because, people are happy it's going to rain, and it produces rajas because the farmers can now know, okay, we need to get out and work our fields. All right, let's move on. And we'll go to the translation. We're not going to read this. We'll just read the verse. 15. Sattva is considered to be buoyant and enlightening. Anything which is light, which floats, which is buoyant, it has some sattvic component. A feather has more sattva than a metal bar. So buoyancy is a feature of sattva. Okay, so that's just one way of thinking. Another way of thinking it. What about rajas? It's stimulating and mobile. Everything stimulating. So rajasic food is very spicy, very sweet, very sour, very bitter, anything that has a very in front of it is rajasic. Right? So South Indian food can be very spicy, so it's beautiful. You look at it, it's pleasing, all lovely colors and a banana leaf and fantastic coconut chutneys. Oh, be careful. And you bite it. Oh, and someone went mad. Someone lost it in the kitchen with the chilies and went mad with the chilies. Your head blows off. So that's another example of something that's sattvic, but then it's very rajasic when you taste it. And then maybe if you're not used to it as a Westerner, then it gives you tamas and you have an upset stomach. Okay, so sattva is considered to be buoyant and enlightening. Rajas to be stimulating and mobile. Any form of mobility whatsoever comes from rajas. There was no rajas, there would be a static universe. Nothing would move. And tamas alone is heavy and enveloping. They function by union of contraries for a purpose, and they cooperate like a lamp. There's the lamp example. Let's just read the lamp example. We don't need to read the whole thing. Go to 79 at the very end. Last 5 lines from the bottom. Like a lamp, they operate to achieve. Okay, and we're not missing anything. He's just giving examples. You know, he compares Rajas to a bull. And what else? Fickleness, tamas. All right, but let's go to the example. Like a lamp, they operate to achieve a common purpose. Just as a lamp, right? It has 3 things: a wick, oil, and a flame. They're completely different things. So, but the 3 things can come together to illumine objects. So the attributes of, then they're completely opposite things. Wick is completely different from oil, which is thick and unctuous. Flame is energy and ephemeral, and so on. But they come together and they function, and they produce light. So in the same way, the attributes of sattva, rajas, and tamas, although contrary to one another, they affect a common purpose. And therefore, when they come together, their intermixtures are infinite. Think of colors. Think of red, yellow, and blue. There is no limit to the number of colors. They are infinite. You can have 1 part yellow, 1 part blue, 1 part red. 1 part yellow, 1 part blue, 2 parts red. You could keep going infinitely with 1 part yellow, 1 part blue, and just keep increasing red, and you'd never get to the end. What to speak of if you change the proportions of red and yellow? So think of the gunas like that. And that's why there is the variety of beings and plants and rocks, and everything is different from something else by dint of having some proportionality of the gunas unique to it and different from any other thing. Okay, so here's 2 pens. What ultimately we can talk about them as atoms and quarks and strings or whatever, but what if we talk about them as their ultimate substratum? Why is this like this and this like this? Well, this is probably blue. It's got a bit more tamas in it. Red is a sign of rajas. So this has more, you know, so both of them are sattva, rajas, and tamas. But this might maybe have 5 degrees of tamas and 2, I'm making this up, 5 tamas, 2 rajas, and this has 5 rajas, 2 tamas. Whatever the story, the difference between one thing and another is nothing other than the proportionality of the gunas that make up the all of the everything other than Purusha, all ingredients of external reality and internal reality, the mind. Happy one day, sad one day, deluded another day. Constantly mood is, why is our moods changing? Because the gunas are constantly changing, constantly. And then time to go to bed, tamas takes over. Time to get up, first raja stirs, dream, REM, and then finally sattva manifests and the organs of perception become aware. Okay, it's daytime. Oh, well, okay, time to get up. So everything is what it is because of the proportionality of the gunas. All right, so there we have it. So that was verse 15. Or was it 14? 14. Let's
14.
move on to 15. And that would be on page. We're not going to read this. But, I think you'll get bored. Page 87. A general cause, the unevolved. Why is there a Prakriti? Why does there have to be a Prakriti behind all of this? Is to be regarded as existing. So in other words, we have to infer that there is a Prakriti from which everything emerges. That's general to everything. Because once the things emerge, they're specific. Buddhi is specific, it has a specific function. Ego has a different specificity, does something else. The sense organs do one thing, the Gyanendriyas do something else. They're all specific. So here, this verse is saying there must be a general cause from which everything comes. So the unevolved, before everything evolved, there must be something that's unevolved. that is to be regarded as existing, meaning we have to infer that this exists. We are obliged to infer the existence of Prakriti. It's considered to be an inference. It's even called the anumanita, the inferred one, in one of the earlier sutras. A general cause, the unevolved, is to be regarded as existing. Why? Why do we have to say there's a Prakriti? Why can't we just say there's a bunch of stuff floating around? Well, because, and these are the 5 reasons. If you want to plow through this, I think it's a little dense. I don't know whether we'll get much value for our money. We can come back to it. How about that? We'll read it, and then if we really desperately feel we missed out on something, we'll come back. Let's work through the text and jump a few verses, and then if we want to, we can come back. So why do we have to say there's a Prakriti? Well, probably another 5 reasons. He likes the number 5. 1, because specific objects are finite. So if something's finite, well, then it must come from something that's not finite. That's the argument. You have to decide whether you think it's a good argument, because other schools would disagree with this. But Sāṃkhya takes the view, if something's finite, then where did it come from? It must have come from some substratum. So, so a pot is finite, but it must have come from clay. Something like that. It's kind of a cause and effect thing. Since there is homogeneousness, the pot is made as somehow or other it's made the same as the clay. So everything that we perceive is made of the gunas, so there must be a cause which somehow or other contains these gunas in some kind of primordial sense, pre-creative sense. So there's homogeneity between the products and the cause. Second reason, since effects exist through energy, there's energy, and then effects. You churn the milk and you get the yogurt. So if an effect is produced by energy, well, energy must be invested in something to create the effect. The energy, energy isn't just floating around in dark space. It must be, energy is something that's invested in a substratum in order to produce the effects. That's the argument. So since these effects are produced by energy, there must be something that is the recipient of that energy. Since there is an issuing forth of effect from the cause, the effects must come from a cause. Remember the Sattkariyavad. This is there. Other schools will disagree with this. We don't, Buddhism would disagree, and Nyaya would disagree, and we're not going to get into all of that. But the Sāṃkhya position is, well, the effect must come from a cause. And finally, since there is a reunion of the universe, this is a presupposition shared by almost all the schools, that everything dissolves at the end of creation. Well, if it dissolves, what's it dissolving into then? There must be something it dissolves into. So therefore, there must be this primordial Prakriti. These 5 points, which we're not going to get into, are essentially the reason this Karika is here is to say, why do we have to posit there's a Prakriti? Why can't we just say there's all these evolutes? Which Nyaya would say something like that. Another school of philosophy would say, well, actually, there's 6 or 7 different things. There's atoms, there's motion, we won't get into it, and they come together and produce creation. And if you dissolve the universe, you don't end up with one Prakriti, you end up with 7 different causes. The powerful school of the Hindu logicians, they're the real rationalists of ancient India, did not follow a Sāṃkhya metaphysics. They did not accept Sattkariyavad, that remember the effect is in the cause, that everything emerges out of one cause. That's Sattkariyavad. We had a whole session on this. Remember I said there was 2 ways of dividing up. There's many ways of dividing up Indian philosophy. One is Sattkarya versus Asatkarya. Sattkarya is Vedanta and Sāṃkhya and yoga. Effects are emerging, they emerge, they are emergence or evolutes from a cause, one cause. Well, one in the sense it has 3 gunas, Prakriti. The other schools say, no, there's no one cause. And from the Hindu traditions, it's the Nyaya, Vaisheshika. If you pick up a book on Indian philosophy, you've heard of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Well, 3 of them disagree here. So if you're interested in that, go on my website, and there's a course on Indian philosophy, and click around, and you can find out about those schools. So we're not going to get into this because you'll all disappear. And but I'm quite happy to come back at some point if we have time and go over the commentary. But for now, right, verse 15, the general cause, the evolved, is to be regarded as existing, meaning we have to infer that there must be a Prakriti, even though it's avyakta, it's unmanifest. What is unmanifest? It's not perceivable. So even though it's imperceivable, we have to conclude or infer that it exists. Why? Because specific objects are finite. They must come from somewhere. Where do finite things come from? They must have emerged from some substratum, number one. Number two, there's homogeneousness between the effect. It's homogeneous with the cause. Although that seems to be begging the question, doesn't matter. 3, since effects exist through energy, there's energy that causes effect. Well, what's the energy? What's being energized that products emerge? What is the primordial thing that's being energized in the first place? There must be something that's being energized for effects to emerge. That's the 3rd argument. And what else? Since there is an issuing forth of effect from the cause, in other words, that's just a presupposition of the school, which is not accepted by other schools, that all effects must have a cause. And finally, well, everybody accepts, almost all Indian schools accept that there is a reunion, meaning everything dissolves back into Prakriti, the end of the cosmic cycle. Okay, my friends, I have no idea what you make of that. That's one of the problems with the online learning, but we will keep going. 16. And we're not going to read the commentary on this. I even wrote here, skip the commentary till the end. We can read the end part. Here. This general cause, the ultimate substratum of everything, Prakriti, the 3 gunas, prior to Buddhi and everything emerging, this general cause functions by means of the 3 gunas. The minute the 3 gunas stir, things evolve. 3 gunas are not the products of Prakriti. No, they are the qualities of Prakriti. They are like light is to the sun. They're not separable. So Prakriti is the 3 gunas. And when the 3 gunas agitate, then there's creation. Can I throw in a little Vedanta here? One of the criticisms that Vedanta will direct towards Samkhya is this: what agitates the gunas in the first place? If everything is originally latent, and then Raja stirs and everything emerges out for 14 billion years and dissolves back, and then you have 14 billion years of latency, and then it starts again. Fine, 14 billion years of latency, and then Raja. What stirs Rajas? Vedanta says it can't be Purusha, because Purusha is just passive consciousness. It doesn't stir anything. And if you want to say that it's the nature of Prakriti to stir, well, it would always be stirring then. Why would it stop? If the sun doesn't stop shining, it's always shining. So what causes Prakriti to stir? Do we remember Aristotle, the prime mover? There's got to be a God, because what moves things in the first place, there's got to be and God has to be unmoved. Otherwise, if you're going to say God is moved, then you've got to have another God for God. Well, what about that God? Is he moved? Then you have an infinite regress. So Aristotle says, well, there must be a prime mover. We call it the nous. And that prime mover must be unmoved. Otherwise, you end up with an infinite regress. So Vedanta's going to say there has to be an Ishvara to move things, not just Prakriti and Purusha. There's got to be an Ishvara that brings them together and causes this stirring. Sāṃkhya is going to argue and say, well, now you don't need a God. You know, when the Purusha meets Prakriti, it's like a magnet. Magnet doesn't do anything, but just its nature is put some iron filings in front of a magnet and automatically the filings move. You can't say the magnet's doing anything. It's just being a magnet. So the Purusha is just being, and because of its beingness, it causes Prakriti to stir. And Vedanta is going to say, no. Who brings them, even if that's the case, which Vedanta would not accept, but for argument's sake, they would say, well, who brings them together such that Purusha can stir Prakriti? There has to be an Ishvara. We'll just take a 1 second break here. Chapter 7 of the Gita. Nice to connect these with texts that we know. Gita's a Sāṃkhya text. It's all Sāṃkhya. Look at this. Chapter 7. Pull out your Gitas, my friends. Jump up. Roll your chairs back to do one of those yoga stretches. Stretch out your arm, grab your Gita. Everybody got the Gita?
Mhm.
Yeah, some of you have to get up. Sorry. Okay. Chapter 7, look, verse 4. This is a truncated type of Sāṃkhya. Everybody got it? Earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and ego. This is my material nature eightfold. So what is he? So this is a truncated version of the Sāṃkhya Tat. He's just chopped out the 10 indriyas. There were different schemas. You don't have to include them in the chart. So he's just got the essential ones. The 8, the 5 gross and the mind and the ego. So verse 4, and then he says, verse 5, oh, greatly armed Arjuna, besides this lower nature, why is it lower? Because it's inanimate, achit. There exists another that's higher. What is it? It consists of the living beings, the Purushas. They sustain the universe. 6, all beings arise from these 2 natures. Sāṃkhya agrees so far. Yes, everything is Purusha and Prakriti. But be assured, it is Ishvara. I am the origin and dissolution of this entire universe. I put it together. Who's going to bring Purusha and Prakriti together? There's got to be a prime mover. And Krishna says, that's me. Okay, verse 7, there's nothing superior that is superior to me. Everything is strung on me as pearls on a thread. You can't see the thread. Well, what's keeping the pearls together then? All strung in a line. There must be a thread. You infer there's a thread. So that's how you make an inference. Or there must be Prakriti. There must be an Ishvara behind it all. Otherwise, how are all these pearls strung together on a thread? How does this universe come together into all these forms unless there's an intelligent being behind it? Anyway, so that's the Vedanta criticism is there must be an Ishvara that brings the Prakriti and Purusha together. Okay. So then we get back to our thing here, our Karika. So the general cause, Prakriti, the avyakta, right? Remember, avyakta is the same as Prakriti, functions by means of the 3 gunas, both individually and in their combination. They come together and they produce everything, but sometimes individually they become dominant. So in fire or in the sun, it's going to be almost, nothing is 100% anything. But probably the sun is going to be almost 100% rajas. But there'll be some tamas there. Otherwise, there'll be other, but mostly we can say something like the sun. Okay, so the avyakta functions by means of the 3 gunas, the constituents. Everything is made, it's the ultimate constituents of everything, both individually and in their combination. It is modified like water by the specific nature residing in the respective constituents. So Prakriti, like water, takes on all these different forms, all these different flavors. Prakriti is like that. All right, well, let's move on because I'm trying to get to something that might be a little bit more interesting. Okay, let's get to the Purusha. You ready? Everybody ready? Bottom of page 90. 2, 3. Spirit, awful term, Purusha. The Purusha is distinct from, as distinct from matter, exists. Why? Why do we posit there's a Purusha, right? We had all these arguments about why there's a Prakriti and all of this. This is what we're interested in, perhaps a little bit more. Why do we say that there is an Atman? Why is there a soul? Why what philosophers call substance dualism? If you don't talk about souls in the philosophy of religion, because that's a theological term. So if you want to argue for a soul, if you're a Christian and you believe in a soul, but you're an academic in the Department of Philosophy, you can't use the language of Christianity or theology. You have to use the language of philosophy. So what's the philosophical term for a soul? Substance dualism. There is a substance underpinning the quality of consciousness, which is different from all other material substances, like atoms and quarks and strings. So therefore, it's substance dualism. This substance is dual. It's different from all other substances. That's the philosophical term for a soul. You don't walk into a philosophy department and start talking about souls. They'll send you next door to the seminary across the street. So what if you want to argue for what the Christians call a soul, or the Hindus call an Atman? What if you want to argue for that in the philosophy department? Well, you have to use the language of philosophy. So the language of philosophy is substance dualism. Okay, so there's a substance. You can do that. You can use philosophy and say, yeah, consciousness, it cannot be correlated with any known material substance. So it must be a different substance. Very straightforward, perfectly legitimate philosophical position to take. The qualia, the consciousness is unlike any other known quality, like form and shape and color and all of that sound. It's completely distinct because it has a qualia, it has a phenomenological, it has a quality of experience that stones don't have and inanimate things don't have. Therefore, that quality must reside in a substance that's different from all other substances. That's philosophy, that's not theology. And you can make, other philosophers will oppose you and resist that and try to, whatever. But it's a philosophical position. It's called substance dualism. So let's go to now. This is then in the language of today's philosophical discourse. This would be called a substance dualist position. So the fact that the very first word, spirit as distinct from matter, right there is substance dualism. Because it's distinct, dual, something else. So spirit as distinct from matter exists. Why? Right, you have to argue it. Well, because an assemblage of sensible objects is for another's use. If something that's made up of parts, see what you think of the argument. We'll read Gaudapada, we'll read the commentary. But the argument is, if something is put together, it has parts, it's not for itself, it's for something else. This book is made of parts. Right, this is made of parts. If something's made of parts, it's not there for its own reason. It's there for somebody else. Of course. Okay, so that seems to be. I think that's accepted pretty much by most schools except the materialists. And even they might accept it, but in a different way. So the first reason, an assembly of sensible objects is for sensible, meaning not sensible in the sense of being common sense, but perceivable by the senses. So an assemblage of sensible objects is for another's use. It's there for somebody else, for a conscious entity. It's not there for itself. It's dead. It's inanimate. It's there for somebody else. Number one. Number two, since this other thing must be the reverse of everything composed of the three constituents, because the three constituents, everything composed of the three gunas, is inanimate. So inanimate things are not there for themselves because they're inanimate. Then they can't experience themselves or other things because they have no consciousness. So therefore, they must be there for a conscious observer, is the argument. 3, there must be superintendence and control. There must be some force that superintends matter and controls it. There must be some intelligence guiding it. 4, since there must be someone to enjoy, someone must be, enjoy doesn't necessarily also means experience, by the way. The word bhoga can mean to enjoy, but it can also just mean a little bit more blandly to experience. And finally, there is activity for the purpose of liberation. So who's being liberated? So there must be something that's being liberated. Let's read the arguments and see what we think. Okay, we'll go to the Bhashya on page 91. And so he starts off by saying, in this manner, through these two verses, the previous two, we kind of skipped them. Well, we looked at them, but we didn't read the commentary thoroughly. Through the previous two verses is known the existence of Prakriti. He says, okay, we're done with Prakriti, discussed it, and we brought forward our arguments as to why there must be a Prakriti. After this, now he's done that, he observes with a view to proving the existence of the Purusha. Now we're going to turn our attention. Remember, this is a metaphysical school, so they're using inference and argument. It's not like Vedanta, which just accepts the Atman. Why? Because the Upanishads accept it. That's scripture. Samkhya is going to argue for it. So he's going to prove the existence of Purusha. How's he going to do that? Number one, let's go. It was said right at the beginning that liberation is secured from the knowledge. Remember, what verse was that? Was that number 2? Have a quick peek. Because the whole text is an elaboration on number 2. Or was it 3? Here, number 2. I'll read it to you. The means to remove suffering. Now we've done a little bit of this text. It's good to connect it with when we started at the beginning. We didn't know what was going on and we were a bit lost. And now we've done a few verses. We got a little bit of a sense of what's going on. Let's connect now. Let's go back and and how is this all related? Well, let's go back to verse 2. And what does it say? Verse 1 said there's suffering. That's why we engage in metaphysical inquiry. Why am I suffering? And then number 2 says the means, how do we stop it? Right? The known means fail. So how do we stop it? Verse 2, this is how you stop it. Suffering, how you solve it. The means revealed by the scriptures. So Samkhya accepts the Upanishads, but it doesn't quote them. Vedanta does that. Vedanta is going to talk about Atman, but the way Vedanta presents Atman and disseminates knowledge of Atman is through scriptural interpretation. Vedanta is going to say, look, the Upanishads say here, it says seek the self, and there, all over the Upanishads, it's full of references, and we'll do a workshop on the Atman at some point, my friends. If you find this terribly dry and boring, you will love the Upanishads. They're beautiful, they're poetic, they're metaphoric, they're not like this. They're not metaphysics and dense, And I maybe we should have started with the Upanishads. Okay, there's me being insecure again. Right, now, verse number 2, the means revealed by the scriptures, Upanishads, for terminating the misery. Oh yeah. Sorry, no, I take that back. There's not reference to the Upanishads. It's a reference to the Veda, the ritual texts. Okay, go to the second sentence. Different from these, the two Purvapakshas, the two proposals we've discussed many times. You solve suffering by known means or by Vedic ritualism that'll take you to a celestial realm, right? We've said that several times. The Samkhya rejects them. Why? Because they're temporary. Even if you go to the celestial realm, it's temporary. Second sentence. This is Samkhya's raison d'etre. This is why this text is written. Different from these two known means, temporary means, and therefore superior because it's permanent. Samkhya is saying, we're going to give you a permanent means to solve suffering. Empirical means are not going to help you. Celestial realm runs out after your karma runs out, you come back down. Not going to help you long term. So what will? Different from these, and therefore superior, are the means of terminating the misery. How does it arise? What does this mean? What is this permanent one? Better than the other two? What is it? It arises from the knowledge of the manifest, unmanifest, and the knower. This is Samkhya's raison d'etre. This is why this is the whole purpose of this text, is to solve suffering and in a deep level way, not through these other two superficial temporary ways. And what's the deep level way? You have to know the difference between these three things. Are we clear now? You clear why we had all of those Karikas we had to wade through what's the unmanifest, what's the manifest, what are all these, and maybe not the most interesting thing we ever read. But that's because, again, let's read it again. Different from these, and therefore superior, are the means of terminating the misery that arise from the knowledge. We have to know these things, not just list them. Okay, 3 things. You have to define them. What are they? What is the unmanifest? What are the gunas? What are the evolutes? And you have to really get into detail. So, because you have to know them thoroughly in order to be liberated. The knowledge of the manifest, the vyakta, the avyakta, and the purusha. That's why we went through all of that kind of like sort of painstaking analysis of the difference between the vyakta and the avyakta and the evolutes and the gunas and all of that. Okay, now we are going to talk about the third on that list, Purusha. All good? We've kept our eye on the ball. So which verse is that? 16. We read that one. Okay, so do we need to read 17 again? No, hang on, we're on 16. We did 16.
We read
So we're
17.
doing Bhashya on 16.
Bhashya on 17.
No,
Bhashya on 17.
we're skipping 16. Right, 17. Did we read the translation?
Yes.
Right. Okay, quickly again. Purusha, which is distinct from matter, a separate substance, separate entity. Why? Because anything, an assemblage of sensible objects that can be perceived, it's for somebody else because it's inanimate. Number one. Number two, then, and this other thing must be the reverse of everything composed of the 3 constituents. Otherwise, it would just be another entity in matter itself, but it isn't. It's the perceiver. It's the enjoyer. 3, since there must be superintendence and control, something must be organizing matter. 4, since there must be someone to enjoy, there must be someone even perceiving or experiencing these assemblages of matter, these things that we call pots and tables and chairs and trees and planets. And finally, since there is the activity for the purpose of liberation, right, which everybody accepts. So, Bhashya. Was said, first big paragraph 91. Now we know where it was said, verse 2. In verse 2, it was said that liberation is secured from the knowledge of what? The manifest, unmanifest, and the knower. Fine. It was said in verse 2, of these, after the manifest, the unmanifest has been known on account of the 5 reasons. That was in verse 15. We kind of skimped over them. The spirit is subtle, like the unmanifest. So there's going to be commonalities and differences. Prakriti is subtle, you can't see it. Pervades everything. Spirit is also subtle, so there's going to be points of commonality, points of difference. First, let's see the commonality. The Purusha is subtle, like the unmanifest, like Prakriti. And now its existence is being proved through inference. They're going to make it, there has to be a Purusha. They're going to infer there must be this other substance. There must be this other entity. Okay, they're going to give you reasons. You can decide whether you think they're good or bad reasons, but here are the reasons of Sāṃkhya. The school that mostly defends through reason and argument the necessity of Atman is Nyaya. If you really want to get the real philosophical arguments in Indian tradition for using reason and argument, not quoting scripture, not Patanjali saying, yes, 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 there's a Purusha, because if you chitta vichinarodha, you will experience it for yourself. We don't have to read anything. You don't have to apply logic. Just do, not that. Not based on experience, not based on scriptural, right? The 3 ways of knowing. Remember them at the beginning of the text. Experience, words. 3rd is inference. So Sāṃkhya is situating itself as a tradition that's giving you reason and argument for accepting these things. But its arguments are nowhere near. They're much more primitive than the arguments given by Nyaya. So if you're really looking for kind of the school of rationalists, out of the so-called 6 schools, it's Nyaya. And in which case you might be interested in a colleague of mine who used to be a student at Rutgers. This is just a small selection of argument. But there's very little available that user-friendly on Nyaya. But you might be interested in the Nyaya Sutras. And I think I'm going to give us a 1-hour workshop at the Shivananda Ashram in February. They asked me to teach something on Indian philosophy, and I'm thinking of doing the chapter on this, the defense of the Atman. And you'll see it's much more sophisticated than Samkhya. Samkhya has a feel to me that it's much more primordial, much older. I'm not saying it's not sophisticated, but it's. But anyway, let's see what we do. Let's see how we feel. Okay, but Nyaya is you might want to keep your eyes open for references to Nyaya, N-Y-A-Y-A. It also has a sutra, the Nyaya Sutra. Okay, this is a little selection by Matthew Dusty, published by Hackett. If you're into that. Okay, so we now go to the Bhasha. Okay, so the spirit is subtle, like the unmanifest, and now its existence is being proved. As far as Gaudapada is concerned, this is what Ishvara Krishna, the author, this is in his interpretation of the Karika. The spirit or Purusha exists. Why? And the first reason, right? Remember, the commentator is bound by the Karika. The commentator has to interpret the Karika. He might bring in some own comments and stuff, but the commentator is commenting. There's a limit to how much freedom the commentator has, and how much he has to sort of. He otherwise shouldn't be writing a comment. Go write commentary on something else if you don't like it. If you're not convinced by a sutra or by a tradition, then go write a commentary on something else. If someone's writing a commentary on a text, they're sort of bound by that text. Like if a Christian theologian is interpreting the Bible, he can't start talking about the Quran or this, that, and the other, or, aliens in outer space. You're bound by the text. So Gaudapada's now he's going to try and unpack these 5 things. Let's see what he has to say. Because composite objects are meant for the use of another. That's right out of the Karika itself. Now he's going to explain. It is inferred that the composition of Mahat, these are compositions, they come together and form things. Elements come together, qualities come together. Mind knows them, the senses act in them. These are compositions. They're meant for the use of another. If there's a composition, it's meant for something other than itself. It is inferred that the composition of Mahat and the rest, the 22 things, is the sake of the Purusha, for it is non-intelligent, unconscious, like a bed. A bed isn't there for itself. It's not conscious. How can it be there for itself? It's an assemblage of parts. It's put together for somebody else. So just as the bed is composed of bedding, props, cords, a covering, cloth of cotton, and a pillow, right? All of these different things come together to form a bed, but they're not coming together for themselves because they're inanimate things. So what's a bed there for? It's meant to serve the purpose of another and not of its own. The different parts of the bed, like the gatra, the legs, and the utpalaka, I have no idea what that is. I actually looked it up and there was nothing in the dictionary, but maybe it doesn't matter. Let's say it's a bedcloth or something. The different parts of the bed, like a gatra and utpalaka, have no mutual purpose to serve. They don't have any, they're not gaining anything. The legs of the bed doesn't gain anything from uniting with the mattress and combining with the sheets. It's inanimate. It's not there. These things are not coming together for themselves. Therefore, it is inferred, making an argument, an inference, not just dogmatically stating, not just quoting the Upanishads, it must be so, my son. Why must it be so? Well, because the Upanishads say, Vedanta does that. Not Sankhya and Nyaya. They accept the Upanishads, but they're giving arguments. So that's one argument. It is inferred that there is a man. We're right. In Western logic, that'll be called a deduction or induction. So it is inferred that there is a man who sleeps on the bed. Bed's not there for itself, for whom the bed is meant. Well, in the same way, this body, a composite of 5 gross elements, is meant for another. It's not coming together for itself. It's dead. The atoms are dead. They're not dead. That's a bad term because dead means it was alive and then died. No, wrong term. It's inanimate. There is the Purusha for whom this body to be enjoyed is produced. this body that is an aggregate of intellect and the rest. The body is made of the intellect, the mind, the ego, and the rest of them. So that's number one. For this reason, now, that's number one. Now, number two, for this reason also, second reason, remember the second reason in the Karika, explaining the second, there's 5 reasons in the Karika. So for this reason also, second reason, the spirit exists, since it is the reverse of that which has the 3 attributes. It's the opposite. The gunas are unconscious, Purusha is conscious. It's the reverse. That which is possessed of the 3 attributes, which is non-discriminated, not conscious. It's an object. So these things are objects, not subjects of experience. They're objects of experience. As mentioned in the previous verse, we sort of skipped through that. It's the reverse of this. It was therefore said the spirit is similar and dissimilar. How is it similar? It's similar to Prakriti because it's all pervasive. How is it dissimilar? Because Prakriti is inanimate and Purusha is animate. So both dissimilar and similar. Now, what's the third reason? On account of superintendence. Something has to be superintending this body, so control. And he gives it. Now you're becoming a little familiar with commentarial style, aren't you? This is what Indian. This is what Indian tradition is. Sutras, primary texts, and commentaries. Right? You've all got Guruji's commentary on the Yoga Sutras, and you study that. Well, what is it? How does intellectuality get preserved and perpetuated in ancient India? We have canonical texts, the original texts, and the commentaries. This is the commentaries. You unpack the sutra or the karika or the shloka if it's the Gita. You give synonyms. You take each word, you give examples, and then you bring in metaphors to illustrate. So here's a metaphor. So this third reason there's a Purusha, because something must be superintending, control. And he gives example. Just as here, there's a chariot. Take a chariot. It's yoked with horses, capable of leaping and galloping and running, but it functions when controlled by a charioteer. It has to be controlled by a charioteer. Something has to be controlling the chariot. So in the same way, the body functions when controlled by the Purusha. So it is said in the Shasti Tantra, which is the original yoga text, before Patanjali. So it is said in that text, it's controlled by the Purusha, nature functions, and it's the Purusha that animates everything. Why does the tree grow? There's a Purusha in it. It's controlling the growth of the tree by its karma. So there has to be something that's governing these different forms. Number 4, because there's 5 reasons I hope I'm not being repetitive, but pedagogy is repetition. And I'm going fast and you're unfamiliar with this. And I hope you appreciate when I keep repeating things and, keeping our eye on the ball and tying us back. Pedagogy is nothing other than that, my friends. It helps us to be organized and so forth. Right? Just like your yoga, asana. For this reason now, the 4th one, also the spirits exist. Which one is that then? Because there must be an enjoyer. Enjoyer meaning experiencer. Just as we infer, now he's going to give a little example. Are you getting familiar with the style? Well, we infer that there must be an enjoyer of mixed food, right? You walk into a restaurant and there's a table with mixed food flavored with the 6 flavors. These are the 6 flavors of Ayurveda. The taste is divided into 6 expressions of taste. And what are they? Sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. So just as when you mix food, then you assume that, well, the food's not there for itself. It didn't get mixed by itself. It's there for an enjoyer. So in the same way, similarly, because the mergent, mahat, and the rest, they can't be the enjoyers because they're not conscious. So we infer then that there must be someone enjoying it. So that's the Purusha for whose enjoyment the body exists. Right? The body has senses. Well, who's enjoying them? The senses interact with the sense objects and record sensations. Well, who's experiencing them then? Can't be the senses themselves. They're inanimate. The eye isn't conscious of its own seeing. There must be something else that's seeing, and that's the recipient, the experiencer of sight and sound. That's a pretty good inference, by the way. Nyaya would say that. This other school I spoke about, that's not a bad inference. There must be something, who's experiencing the input from the senses. So that's that argument. And finally, for this reason too, number 5 in the list of Karika 17, since there is activity for liberation, who's seeking liberation? It's ridiculous to say Prakriti is seeking liberation, it's inanimate. So who is it that's seeking moksha then? And this may sound a strange argument for us, but this is very, very common. This would like, look at what he says. Kaivalya is the abstraction of Kevala. In other words, Kaivalya is the abstract noun, just like, you know, parenting, from a parent, the abstract noun is parenting, or from Vishnu, you get Vaishnava, or from Shiva, you get Shaiva. So from Kevala, you get Kaivalya. Don't worry about that. So this seeking of liberation, the activity for this purpose, for the purpose of liberation, from this, right, there's activity. People strive for liberation. Well, who is it that's striving for liberation? Can't be the atoms or the qualities or any of those ingredients on the 22 ingredients. Why would they be striving for liberation? What are they going to be liberated from? So therefore, there must be something that's striving for liberation. So from this activity for liberation, for one's own release, moksha, is to be inferred that the spirit exists. Something must be striving for liberation. And look at this assumption. We may, you know, for everybody, look at this. For everybody, learned and ignorant, wishes for the cessation of the succession of worldly existence. The assumption is everybody wants to be liberated because everyone is aware that they're suffering, even the ignorant. What does that make us? What does that make those of us that don't even think we're suffering and not seeking moksha? He says even the ignorant want that. What are we? We're lower than the ignorant in that case. For everyone, everybody, learning and ignorance. I wonder what Gaudapada would say if he came to our time and place. Everybody, learned and ignorant, wishes for the cessation of the succession of the worldly existence, your reincarnation and samsara. Thus, on account of these 5 reasons, there exists the Purusha, different and over and above the body. There must be an enjoyer. 5 arguments, right? There must be something distinct from the body, right? Why? Because the body, let's go back to the translation now. Let's just focus on the body. Number 1, the body is an assemblage of sensible objects. The body has senses that can contact sense objects. Well, who's using it? Indriya is an instrument. Instruments are not instrumenting themselves. An instrument is used by someone different from them. If you have a garden spade and a fork, they're not there for themselves. They're not going to start digging by themselves. Their instruments are used by somebody else. That's the first reason. An assemblage of sensible objects is for another's use. Somebody else is using them, the Purusha. And this other must be different from everything because the instruments are inanimate. So the user must be animate, different. There must be superintendence and control. If there is a chariot or an assemblage or instruments, then somebody must be controlling it. They're not controlling themselves. There must be someone to enjoy. Someone must be the experiencer. Number 4. And since there is the activity for the purpose of liberation, so when we become frustrated, and that's how the whole Karika started, because of suffering, we seek liberation. But who the heck is seeking liberation then? And that's the 5th reason. Okay, we'll read one more and see how we feel. This is pluralist. This is not monism. This is not Advaita Vedanta, where there's only one soul. In Samkhya and Yoga, there are a plurality of souls, each one distinct. They don't merge into Brahman like a drop of water in the ocean. That school of Advaita Vedanta has received massive mileage in the West in the form of Neo-Advaita, but it's only one sub-school in India. Almost all the schools of Indian philosophy they're pluralists. There's more than one Atman eternally, not just in even in liberation. There's a plurality of Atmans. Advaita Vedanta is one sub-school of Vedanta. There's even within Vedanta, all the other schools are pluralist and accept a plurality of souls. Sankhya is pluralistic. Yoga is pluralistic. Nyaya, the school of logicians, are pluralistic. And the other, all of the other 5 schools are pluralistic. And within Vedanta, half of Vedanta is pluralistic, meaning that there are more than one souls. There's a plurality of souls, and each soul is individual, eternally individual. They don't merge into this, a Brahman. But if you go into an East-West bookstore, you don't see any of that. 90% of books in East-West bookstore, in the, in whatever, in the East Village, are going to be mostly Advaita Vedanta. That's just a quirk of transplanted Hinduism. That's a story for another day. But don't think Hinduism is that the merging into the oneness. No, not this, and not yoga, and not numerous other schools. Some schools, but not the schools that are monism. There's a word for you. Monism means when there's only one Atman. And Advaita Vedanta is monistic, and the Shakta traditions, Kashmiri Shaivism, Tantra, they're also monistic, but in a different way. And those are the schools that are somehow or other got exported to the West and are, sort of popular in the West. That's just a quirk of Western transplanted Hinduism. In real life Hinduism in India, first of all, the Tantra schools are marginal. They don't even make it into the 6 schools of philosophy. There's no Tantra in the 6 schools of philosophy. They didn't make it into the list. I'm not saying they're not important. That doesn't mean anything. That could just be Brahmana sort of orthodoxy. I'm not saying that makes them right or wrong or good and bad. I'm just pointing out, making an observation. Just be aware of that. Indian traditions are far more variegated than the sort of, watered down neo-Advaita Vedanta that we find commonly representing, Hinduism and yoga philosophy and Vedanta in the West. Okay, so and that school, the idea that the Atman merges into Brahman, that is the position of Advaita Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta only, and not of the other Vedanta traditions. I just wanted to get that off my chest. But look at this: the souls are many. There's a plurality of souls. That's why I that little spiel, because you'll be thinking, many of you will be sort of probably have picked up books and that speak of the oneness of Atman and Brahman, whereas most of the schools are going to see that there's some kind of a distinction between them. And Sankhya is one of those schools. The souls are many. Why? Since birth, death, and the instruments of cognition and actions are allotted severally. We die separately. We're born separately. How can there be one Atman, right? And our instruments, our cognition are distinct, right? So I have bad eyesight. You don't have bad eyesight. That's one reason. And also, since occupations are not simultaneous and at once universal. I'm not sure what he means by that, but let's read the commentary. And number 3, since the 3 attributes affect severally, right? The gunas affect everybody differently. Let's go into the commentary and see what Gaudapada has to say, and then we might want to wrap up for today, or if you want to continue, we'll see how we feel. Let's read the Bhasha. Now, this is on page 94. Whether it is only one Purusha that is superintendent over all bodies, Advaita Vedanta would say something like, we don't have time to really, I don't want to bring in Advaita Vedanta right now, but anyway, let's just stick with this. Whether it is only one Purusha that is superintendent over all bodies, like the string that passes through a necklace of gems, that reminds us of the Gita verse, doesn't it? Krishna says, I am the string. Or whether there are many Purushas, presiding severally over individual bodies. This issue is to be discussed. Why does it discuss it? Because Sankhya opposes Advaita Vedanta. And Advaita Vedanta opposes Samkhya. And that's one of the big conversations within Hinduism. There's conversations without opposing Buddhism and Jainism. Those are opposing non-Vedic schools. There's all kinds of conversations for 1,000, 1,500 years, 2,000 years. But within Hinduism, within the schools that accept the Vedas and the Upanishads, there are differences, commonalities, but differences. And one of the differences is, well, is there one ultimate Atman or plurality? Sankhya, plurality, okay? And that's the issue that's to be discussed, right? So let's see how the discussion unfolds. And we'll go to 94. Okay, second paragraph. The word Janma, Marana, Karanani, 3 words. Janma means birth. Marana means death. That this is in the Karika. This is in the verse itself. He's explaining. Remember, the commentators take each word and they explain it. And the organs, the karanas, they're also called indriyas, right? You might be familiar with the term indriyas, gyan indriyas, karam indriyas, but they're also called karanas, right? So because of they're separate, several allotment, everybody dies differently, everyone's born differently, you're not all born at one time, and our instruments are all different. There's several allotment means the distinction between these 3 things. Pratiniyama, for each, this is the meaning. They're all distinct. If there were but one, if there was only one Purusha, then when one was born, all would be born. Why are there differences then? There's only one Purusha. There must be, obviously there's a plurality of Purushas. Everyone's born differently. When one died, all would die. If there was any defect in the organs of one, such as deafness, blindness, numbness, mutilation, or lameness, then all would be that. So clearly there's a difference. It's just common sense. From a Sankhya point of view, it's common sense. Advaita Vedanta would say, yes, it's common sense. Let's not get into Advaita Vedanta, but they would say common sense is illusory, vyavaharika. Let's save that for another day. But this is not the case. It's not the case that there's only one, everyone's born at the same time with the same instruments. It's not the case. Everyone's born separately. And therefore, from the several apportionment, meaning distinctions between the deaths and births and organs of all living entities, dogs have their organs different from ours. Therefore, the plurality of spirits is established. It's obvious. It's common sense that you're not me. You're in your body, not in my body. You were born when you were born. That's why we have different dates of birth. I mean, it's so common. It's such common sense. It seems silly to discuss it, but there's there are schools, specifically Advaita Vedanta, that develop sophisticated arguments as to why actually common sense is illusory. That's a story for another day. And I'm not, so Advaita Vedanta is a powerful tradition. I mean, they've had 1,200 years of brilliant theologians defending their points of view. So I'm not, but Sankhya is not that. That's all. That's the only point I want to make. Don't conflate all Hindu traditions with Advaita Vedanta. Okay. So therefore, there's a plurality of spirits or Purushas. And for this reason also, that means another one. Whenever he says for this reason also, then look down at the translation and you'll see reason number 2. Okay, are you getting a sense of how the commentaries work? The Karikas makes a claim and then it might have 3 or 4 or 5 reasons, often 5. Everybody was on a roll with 5, 5 vrittis, 5 yamas, 5 niyamas, 5 kleshas. There seems to have been, maybe, I don't know, keep it simple. But there's often 5, not always. So we've had 9s, we've had different numbers of lists, and it's 8 angas. So there's not always 5, but it's very, very common. So what else? What's the second reason? For this reason also, what's that? That there is no activity in one at the same time. We're all acting differently. So how can there be one Purusha? The word yugapat, when it says the word yugapat, you'll say, what? That word is coming from the Karika. So when he says something like the word yugapat, you look at the Sanskrit and where is it? Yugapat, first line, second to last word. I'm just helping you become familiar with commentarial style. This is how the commentaries work. They'll take a word and they'll say, oh, this word means this. And they'll explain it. right? So, right, so Patanjali says something like, I don't know, abhyasa viragya abhyam tandirodaha. What is, okay, abhyasa yatna, tatrastito yatna. And then the commentator will say, the word yatna means da, 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 da. And that's how it works. They'll take a word from the sutra or the karika and explain that word. So for this reason too, second line on page 95, the word yugapat simultaneously, it means at one time. So a yugapat means the opposite, not at one time. Activity, meaning everybody's acting separately, not at the same time. So therefore they must be different agents of action. So there's different purushas. This verse is about establishing the differences amongst purushas. Third reason, activity. Since activity with reference to virtue, right, dharma, adharma, and the like, virtue and the like means dharma, adharma, Patanjali calls it punya, apunya, is not seen at one at the same time. While some are engaged in virtue, others are in vice. Still others are in non-attachment, yet others are in knowledge. So therefore everyone's doing different things. So how can there be the only one Purusha? From this activity, not at one and the same time, the fact that everyone's acting separately, differently, distinctively, it is proved that there are many spirits. This may sound obvious, but you have powerful Purvapakshas, opposing points of view, saying, no, there's only one Brahman, there's only one Purusha, there's only one spirit. And moreover, what else? What are the reasons? Because the attributes, the gunas, affect variously. I'm in Rajas, you're in Sattva. I'm in Tamas, you're in Rajas. By the different modifications of the three attributes, they modify differently. Forms are different. Some people are Rajasic, some forms are Tamasic, like a tree. So therefore what? Therefore there must be a plurality of Purushas. By the different modifications of the three gunas, the plurality of the Purushas is proved. For instance, in ordinary life, one who is sattvika is happy. Keep this in mind, by the way. It goes against our consumer culture. I'm going to repeat this. Gita or Sattva is happiness. And we're talking about material prakritic happiness. Let's be clear. We're not talking about the bliss of the Atman. That's way down the road. Just right here and now, in this body, with this mind, how can we feel happiness in this body mind, right? We haven't made it to the bliss of the Atman yet. Okay, so in the meantime, how at least can we feel a little bit of, happiness while we're on the road, on the path? Sattva is happiness. Rajas is suffering. Keep that in mind. Tamas is delusion, just madness, just making stuff up in fantasy. So pay attention. Next time you're overwhelmed by rajas, just notice how unhappy you are. Next time you're obsessed with the desire or some sense that you need to do something or some running around, just step back for a second, activate your higher self, activate your jnana samskara. What is the jnana samskara? This is the jnana samskara, the information we get from the scriptures. Where does jnana come from? It doesn't self-manifest, it's not magic. It has to come into the mind. That's why we study, my friends. Some study is metaphysically dense like this. Some, like the Upanishads, are beautiful and poetic. Some, like the Gita, are practical and easy to understand. It's all svadhyaya, and a bit of metaphysical workout's not a bad thing. And that's what this text is. So the attributes, right? So how does this prove the Purusha? Well, one who is sattvika is happy. Another rajas is unhappy. Think of our present president. Quintessential rajas. Not very tamasic. I mean, it's tamas there. And look how miserable he is. Became the president of the United States, look how miserable it is. Infinite desires, infinite. Like a fire, you keep throwing fuel in it. What does it do? It doesn't put the fire out, it just burns more. So rajas is unhappy, while a third, tamas, simply deluded. So when we get deluded, we just kind of make stuff up in our head. In this manner, right? We're putting all this together. From the different modifications of the gunas is the plurality established, right? So 5 reasons are given. You can decide what you think of them. Why must there be a Purusha? Let's go back to the translation now. We read the commentary, we go back to the translation. This is important for us. We might be less interested in Prakriti and manifest, unmanifest, but surely, especially if we're yogis, we're seeking the Atman. But think about it. You're going to do Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Why? Tada drashtu sarupe vastanam. Well, how do you know there's a drashtu then? Where do you get that idea from? Where do you get the idea that there's a drashtu? Fine, the Upanishads told you. That's it? You're just going to do it just because some book told you there's an Atman? You're going to sit in Chitta Vritti Nirodha for 50 years? It's a bit of a risky investment, isn't it? So there has to be some reason and argument supplied as well. You're just going to blindly follow some scripture? Upanishads? 2,500 years? You can. I'm being rhetorical here. But there's also room for reason and argument. And these are the reasons Sāṃkhya gives. If you want more, Nyaya. Check out the Shivananda. I think I'm going to accept. They asked me to do something in February. They're doing a philosophy month. So just to do something different, I think we'll do Nyaya. Just to put everyone to sleep. So what are the 5 reasons Sāṃkhya gives? Read it again, the translation. Okay, now we did a bit of the commentary. Now we'll read the translation again. Verse 17, bottom of 93. Spirit as distinct. Substance dualism, remember, if you want to use the modern philosophy of religion term. Spirit as distinct from matter exists. Why? 5 reasons. Number 1, an assemblage of sensible objects, right? Empirical objects, is for someone else's use. Right? Then the matter is inanimate. It's not there for itself. It doesn't experience itself. So therefore there must be another. Number 1. 2, since this other must be the reverse of everything composed of the 3 constituents. If it was just the 3 constituents, then it would just be inanimate then. Then it would just be part of matter. There would be no observer, no perceiver, no enjoyer, no experiencer. So it must be different. Number 2. 3, there must be a superintendent and control. Someone must be controlling it. Why do these forms emerge? Well, they emerge to accommodate living entities with the specific karma of living entities. Why is that oak tree over there different from the elm tree over there? Well, the karma, whoever's in that oak tree's karma is a little bit different from the elm tree. Maybe the elm tree gets cut down or gets struck by lightning. Well, the oak's 200 years old. So the ayur is different, lifespan. Jati is different. One's an oak, one's an elm. And the quality of life is different. Maybe the oak is in full sunshine and the elm is stuck in the forest with no light. So even a tree has a difference in jati, ayur, bhoga. So these forms are there to accommodate what? They're not there for themselves. They're there. They're animated by living entities, Purushas. So there must be lots of Purushas. That's the keep your eye on the ball. This verse is about there's plurality of Purushas. So where are we? We're almost done, my friends. Since there must be superintendents and control, something must be controlling the growth of things and the controlling my body. Who's controlling it? The atoms. What's controlling the atoms? Since there must be someone to enjoy, someone must be experiencing objects of experience. By definition, an object is something that's an object to who? If there was only matter, there wouldn't be an object because there would be no one for whom it is an object. There'd be no subject to perceive it as an object. So therefore, no one would even know it was there. So, and finally, because of moksha, since there must be someone to enjoy, and since there is the activity for the purpose of liberation, there's this drive towards being free from suffering, which is how the whole Karika begins. What would you like to do? Does anybody want to ask questions? Do you want to read some more? Are we done? We won't meet again till January.
I have a
done a question.
Let's take it in turns. Yes. I'm missing a page here. Yes. Okay. Questions. How should we do this? Go ahead.
One is that this is one of the unique scriptures which doesn't start with the word atha in the start. Does that mean that this is signifying posterity in terms of start and doesn't need to signify anything that I'm now starting this? Because it jumps right into the first phrase into the dukkha.
Well, it's not a sutra. It's a Karika. So the sutras, Atato Brahma Jignasa, so that's Vedanta. Atta Yoga Anushasanam, Yoga. Atato Dharma Jignasa, that's Mimamsa. So those are all attas. Vaisheshika, I believe, has an atta. And I don't think Nyaya has an atta. I'll tell you right now. So it's not a mandatory rule. That it is a fact that you're picking up on the fact that most of them do, but that isn't a mandatory rule, and Nyaya doesn't have it. And number one, and number two, it's a Karika. It's not a sutra.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily here. The Nyaya Sutra starts off with knowledge source. It just lists the ingredients of the sutras, and it doesn't start with atta. Questions?
I have a confusion about the residence of the soul and its sort of atomic unit, in a sense. If we've established there are multiple souls, then I'm using atomic unit loosely. I hope you just go with it. If matter dissolves and differentiates through the subtle elements and on up as vyakta, then is soul associated with that smallest individualizable unit?
Well, we're going to read the verse. I think it's the very next verse where it's going to say the Atman is infinite. So its infinite possibility is delimited by karma and the organs and the instruments and organs of perceptions that it receives by karma. Just like light is potentially infinite, but it may be restricted by the walls of this room or the atmosphere of the planet. So this tradition takes the view that the Atman is infinite. So it does not. So, however, there is also this. There is also this possibility that it's both infinite and infinitesimal. So you don't come to unlike the atoms, which are actually quantitatively limited in some invisible microscopic way. You get to a stop sign with an atom, and then if you dissolve that, it becomes something else, the tanmatras. So it's not that kind of atomicity, or let's use the Sanskrit word anu, but it's infinitesimal, whatever that means. But its quality is infinite. You could also think of it that way, that as a substance, it's infinite. If you're going to accept the distinction between a substance and a quality, which I'm not, I think, it's Chitti Shakti. It's Chitti Shakti. So Shakti is a quality, and it's a quality of Chitti. So this tradition and philosophy in general, but not necessarily Buddhism, but many philosophers would say if there's a quality, it must reside in a substance. Qualities don't just freelance around. Red isn't just floating around. Something is a thing is red. Redness doesn't somehow float around in its own essence. So the qualities are in here in a substance. So therefore, if we think of the Atman as a substance, and I may be bringing in vocabulary here which we're not going to find in the Sāṃkhya Kārikās, but bear with me. So therefore, we can say it's infinite, but some thinkers, and I may be bringing in a bit of of the dualistic, pluralistic Vedantins here would say, sure, it's infinite, and Samkhya would certainly say it's infinite, and it's going to say that, I think in the very next verse, it's infinite, but it's also, because if it's infinite, it's just that there's a plurality of souls, so they have to be grounded in some particular, and so therefore it's infinite in quality, but it's infinitesimal in the particular substance that constitutes one Atman as distinct from another Atman. And that's the substance, the quality of which is Chitti Shakti, which is potentially infinite. Did that make some sense?
Absolutely. And it just might be a question that's going to take me a long time to continue to articulate, but you've certainly said words that I think I understand that are consistent with what I'm learning here.
And let's always remember not to confound this with Advaita Vedanta. And the reason I keep saying that is because of
So each person,
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Sorry. So each Purusha is liberated by himself, according to what you just said.
Yes.
It's not like universally you could be liberated.
No. This is one of the arguments given. Actually, Samkhya would oppose Advaita Vedanta. They would say if there's only one soul, ultimately, and all individuality is illusory, and the world is illusory, and all demarcators and individuators are illusory, and there's only Jagat Mithya, Brahman Satyam, there's only Brahman, then if one Atman attains liberation and realizes its real nature as Brahman, well, why wouldn't everybody else become liberated if there's only one Brahman? So that's one of the arguments that Samkhya will direct against the monist traditions. But the Atman is individual and pluralistic in this tradition. But it's also infinite. So just like you could have, let's say go with 100. Let's make infinity 100. You could have 100 light bulbs in the same room, simultaneously filling up the room with their light, but they don't merge. They're individual light bulbs, even though each one is infinite, or in the case of my example, filling up the same room and coexisting and co-penetrating the same room, but they're all coming from an individual source. They don't merge. That's how Samkhya would understand liberation.
The nature of my question was more like, if we look at this screen, a panel of 20 or 30 people, we might imagine each of those as one of those light bulbs you're referring to, but I'm imagining the light bulbs at subatomic scales, that there is soul inherent in life that is beyond what we are associating with the individual.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We started off with we got 30 participants. We started off with 110, and we started on the Vyakta and Avyakta, and all the light bulbs went out. But is this Siegfried?
No, this is Ned.
Ned, when you're talking about subatomic, are you talking about something that's reducible, that's potentially irreducible?
Yes, I'm looking at the chart on page Roman numeral L.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining, the manifest, the most irreducible manifest.
Yes.
As having Purusha associated with it.
Well, Purusha is associated with all the tattvas. It's enveloped by all of them. The five gross is just the gross body, but it's enveloped by the mind and intelligence. I thought your question was coming from a place of the Atman is irreducible, but is it somehow, do you get to some like a quark or a muon type equivalent, a consciousness equivalent of a material subatomic entity? These traditions would say it's infinitesimal, but they don't say that actually. What they do say is it's infinite, but since it's an individual, that infinite Chitti Shakti, which is its quality, It's grounded in the substance, and the substance, I don't think they would say it has some spatial quantitative stop sign that it's tiny, 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 and stop, like a quark might. Let's say we don't know yet, right? Because Newton thought the atom was irreducible, and then with that we found that was wrong, and then protons and electrons, and now, but let's imagine that the muon turns out to be irreducible, or a string, or whatever. Is there an irreducible element of physics? When physics will never answer that question, because it will say, yeah, well, as far as we know right now, this is irreducible, just like Newton did, but then in 100 years, they might find a whole universe within that. So the Atman there's no talk of the Atman having some kind of a quantitatively minute dimensionality, hence the word infinitesimal. But having said it's infinitesimal, its quality is infinite.
Yes, where I was going, and I really don't mean to be dominating, and so I will yield the floor, but I was just concerned with the soul being bound to the physical Prakriti at some level. And so through the recombination of elements through time, what we think of as the soul and associate with the individual could be conceptually completely wrong, because we are constituted of these trillions of cells, all of which have their own histories and derivations through Prakriti, but also bound to soul. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, but remember, this is dualistic. The stuff of the soul is not the same as the stuff of anything else that emerges from Prakriti. Whether you want to use the language of Samkhya with its 22 evolutes, or you want to use the language of science with its subatomic particles, each has its own history. This is a dualistic system. That which is the Atman is distinct. It's the opposite. We read that verse, and and we will be reading the next verse next time we meet. It's the opposite of anything of the qualities of Prakriti, except for some. Like they're both, Prakriti is infinite. We'll get to that. There'll be some things that is the same, but it's the opposite in many ways from Prakriti. I'm not sure. I'm quite. I may not be quite tuning into exactly where you're coming from. So the simplistically, the Atman is a different substance. It's a different thing altogether, completely opposite in most ways, other than one or two ways which we'll discuss. Completely the opposite of anything that Prakriti and anything emerging from Prakriti. And
I accept what you're saying, and I'll yield so other people can ask questions, because maybe my question will become more refined so that it makes more sense to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll please raise it again, next class or whatever. Or even now. Let's just see. Does anybody else have any questions? Please don't be.
Edwin.
Yes.
I want to piggyback on what Ned was discussing. I recently heard that really our Purusha, our consciousness, has infinite potential for expansion. So based on our samskaras, we might reincarnate in a particular body. And depending on our samskaras, we might be in a slug or maybe a human body with potential for liberation. So I'm wondering if that, container that we reincarnate into, the mind expands or contracts, or the particular samskaras that we need to burn in that particular lifetime is manifested in what qualities. I'm kind of losing my terms here, but I'm just wondering if the constraint of the Purusha is connected with the physical body that we're born into, no matter how small or large it might be.
Yeah, but we're going to see a surprising verse at the end of this text, which says actually no one was bound, no one was liberated. Let's hold on that. But the Purusha, yes, is constrained by its karmic receptacle of the body and mind. The consciousness is potentially infinite, but it becomes like light. It becomes trapped. The awareness that could pervade all infinitely becomes trapped by the density of its engagement. The mind also is potentially infinite. The mind is Prakriti. It's an instrument. It's not conscious. It's external to Purusha, but it too can expand infinitely. And that explains the mystic powers in chapter 3 of Patanjali. So each Purusha has its own mind, which creates karma. And based on that karma, finds itself situated in a particular body. That's basic. Everybody accepts that. I mean, that's common to all the schools of Indian philosophy. So, there's... So maybe I misunderstood your question as well. But the Purusha is bound in one sense, although we're going to find a surprising twist at the end of this Karika. An individual Purusha has its own individual mind, its own individual collection of karma that results in its body. Where the school gets into trouble, Samkhya, where it gets into trouble with Vedanta is on a number of questions, but one of them is, where's free will? Who's making the decisions to follow Dharma or Adharma? They always frame free will in terms of you follow Dharma or Adharma. Is it the Atman or is it the mind? Samkhya would say it's the mind. The question then is, well, what's the poor old Purusha done there? Why does one Purusha get trapped in one mind that's adharmic, and another Purusha, if the Purusha's got nothing to do with it, it's just a passive agent, why does one have a loser mind, a klishta mind, and the other have an aklishta mind? One has a dharmic mind. So that's not what you were talking about, but that's an extension from
Edwin, the karmasya, one thing that's always puzzled me is how that is somehow tied to the Purusha. So it carries over from one life to the next. And you mentioned that not just the karmasya, but even the buddhi, the mind itself, is somehow tied and associated in some way with that particular Purusha.
Yeah, how that takes place, we don't know. The karma-ashaya, but remember the buddhi is part of the karma-ashaya, but that's a separate thing. Patanjali just says, cause of suffering is the Samyoga, this coming together, which what you're talking about. The Samyoga is called in Patanjali, coming together of Purusha, the Drishtra, the seer and the seen. And then he says, well, what causes that then? He just says avidya. Avitasya hetur avidya. So avidya causes the coming together. Now, how does that stick? How is the Purusha stuck to its karma-ashaya? We are not going to get a metaphysical, there's no metaphysical explanation for that in Samkhya. It just is the case that avidya is the glue, is the cause of the coming together of the karma-ashaya, to use your frame of reference, the subtle body, with the Atman. How do these two completely distinct things adhere? How does the karma-ashaya adhere to the Atman? No, you're not going to get any kind of metaphysical discussion on the mechanics of that. I've never seen anything other than reference to this term. It's just avidya.
Thank you, Edwin. I've just been wondering if you knew of any explanation anyway.
Avidya. I mean, at some point, there's got to be. You've got to have identified something, whatever you call it. There must be some kind of property, some kind of a quality, something that causes, you could call it amagama, but there must be some metaphysical a real thing, and all the schools just say it's avidya. And Krishna then says, well, this is my Shakti, don't try to understand it. Devi hiya shaguna mayi mama maya, duratyaya. Hard to overcome, it's my maya, this is just God. The theists are going to say this is just God's marvelous power. Otherwise you have no explanation. Even Descartes ran into problems with this. This is the big, problem with Cartesian dualism. But so even if you identified something, you come up with, this is what causes it to stick. But what causes that? What is that? What can consciousness is just pure consciousness. Nothing sticks to it. It has no parts. It has no inside or outside. How can anything stick to it? So it's mysterious, and the theists just say this is God's power, and the other traditions just say, look, it's just Maya. We avidya. Anirvachaniya. It cannot be understood. Every philosophy, every science, every theology has a stop sign. What caused Big Bang? Stop sign. Can't ask that question from the parameters of science. Theology. What causes God? Stop sign. Everything has its kind of, well, this is just the way it is. A foundational presupposition that you can't keep. Otherwise, you get an answer. Then you say, well, what caused that? Oh, it's this other thing. And it's infinite regress. Everything you can keep saying, well, what caused that? What caused that? What caused that? What caused that? At some point, you either just keep doing that forever, or you just accept foundational presuppositions. And the foundational presupposition in Sāṃkhya is avidya, ignorance somehow or other. It causes this coming, the samyoga, Patanjali, now I'm using Patanjalian terms, but that's Sāṃkhya, the samyoga of the seer and the seen.
So it's kind of like in mathematics where there's axioms. At some point you have assumptions, and you go from there.
Yeah. Otherwise, there has to be a foundation to everything. Otherwise, everything is going to be infinite regress. You can never have a discussion.
Right.
There's going to be no basis, no support for any kind of structure at all.
This is true.
There is no system of knowledge without a foundational presupposition. And those of us that are bhaktas, we're quite happy with that, because we want God to be infinitely mysterious. We think that's pretty cool. And we're quite happy accepting that. But if you're a non-theist, then then it's going to be more of a frustrating, right? Well, why is it this way and not some other way? Pandit Maharaj, my good friend Paul Sherbo. Well, let me introduce you all to Paul Sherbo. He's one of the best Sanskrit scholars in North America. Panditji Maharaj, Jai Ho. So nice to see you. This is Paul Sherbo. He used to be a professor here at Rutgers of Sanskrit, and is now translator. He's been translating his whole life, and now working on many commentaries of all kinds of commentaries. He's the quintessential Shastri, mind always absorbed in the sacred text. So, and whenever I have questions, I drop.
Yes, I had one.
Whenever I have questions, I always write to Paul Sherbo. Nice to see you, Babaji. Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
May I? Sorry, I was just wondering if you would clarify the difference between intellect as buddhi versus intelligence as aspect of Purusha.
Well, when he uses the term intelligence, the Sanskrit's actually chaitana. I wouldn't personally translate that as intelligence. I would translate that as consciousness or awareness, the ability to know, not any content, nor any instrumentality. Buddhi is an instrument of knowledge that determines, is it this, is it that? So it's an instrument, it has a function. Whereas when they use the term chaitana, which this translation translates as intelligence, I think that's a bit infelici. I wouldn't translate it that way. Chaitana means the power to know. It's awareness, it's consciousness, but it's not content or instrument of knowledge.
Thank you. I was getting a little confused by that because it seemed like intelligence and intellect are very closely related to each other.
That's just the translator, my friend. It's not.
Okay.
It's not the Sanskrit. It's clearer in the Sanskrit. But one thing that's very puzzling to me in the Sāṃkhya Kārikā, Panditji, would you have an opinion on this? Paul Sherbo. This, I think we may, whether we read the verse or it's coming up next verse. Purusha is Prakriti is aviveki, has no viveka. No discrimination. This text says Purusha has viveka. That's very confusing to me because in yoga, viveka is not a quality of Purusha. It's a quality of Prakriti. It's a quality of Buddhi. It's a quality of Sattva. It's ultimately Prakritic. So this text is using the term viveka as a quality of Purusha. I've never seen that before. I don't understand what they mean by that. They can't be, because the Yoga Sutras is very clear. Viveka is the highest expression of sattva, but is nonetheless prakritic. Babaji, do you have an opinion on that? Prakriti is aviveki and Purusha is vivekin. Why would Purusha be vivekin? Babaji? Can you hear me? Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Babaji. Bottom left, mute button.
No.
Now we can hear you. Why would Samkhya call Purusha the Vivekin when the Vivekin in Patanjali is the mind, it's the Buddhi, it's actually Prakriti? Do you have an opinion? All right. So
the question is whether the Purusha can make distinctions.
Yeah, but it's the mind that makes distinctions. That's the function of the Prakritic Buddhi.
So I'm saying, does the Purusha make distinctions? If the
Sāṃkhya
Purusha
Kārikā
doesn't make distinctions, then Viveka can't be a quality of the Purusha.
Yeah, but in one of these verses, it specifically says the Purusha is the Vivekin. And it contrasts with the Prakriti, which is avivekin. So how can the Purusha in its pure, in its pure nature, in its Svarupa, how can it be a Vivekin? When Viveka, in all other Sankhya traditions, including the Yoga Sutras, Viveka is a function of Buddhi. We'll have to think about that, Babaji. Next time you come, we'll ruminate on that, okay? Anyway, I'm sorry, my friends. Yeah. Any other questions? What do you think of this text?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I wondered if you have, when we talk about the senses, there isn't proprioception or interoception in there. Like why, here, I'll show you me. Why you think when everything is so sophisticated around all of this cosmology, why they wouldn't be sophisticated enough to include the sense of knowing how you feel inside and knowing how you move through space?
I don't see this as a very richly developed psychological text. It seems more concerned with basic categories of metaphysics. It has a few verses, very, very brief verses about intellect and mind, but not at all developed. This is more of a, so you want, so introspection and is not something that you'll find maybe more discussion about that in Vedanta and, apperception and introspection and these sorts of qualities. You'll find more discussion on that in Vedanta and Nyaya, also as one of the reasons to posit a Purusha as subject of, knowing of one's own mental states, ability to know one's own mental states. It can't be the mental state that knows itself, that there's something that knows the mental states that must somehow be different. Is that where you're coming from? Yeah, in terms of why not this text, there's only 72 Karikas.
No, that's a good answer. You gave me some, I always wondered this question. So it's like in senses, we know that proprioception is important and interoception is important. So the answer is it's not developed, it suffices.
Yeah, not really. I don't find this a sophisticated text at all in terms of the analysis of mind and the functioning of mind. I don't think that's its project. Its project is,
thank you so much.
Yeah, project is to understand the difference, the basic difference between the Purusha, the Avyakta, and the Vyakta, and really very basic categories are presented. Nothing more than that. I think Buddhist texts get a lot more into apperception and introspection and those kinds of things. So you might find a lot of that in Buddhist texts as well. Any other questions?
Yes, Edwin
Okay,
G.
thank
Yeah.
you. Have a
You're
good
welcome.
evening. Thank you for all your precious.
Thank you.
Edwin G. I have
Yeah.
a question for you. I was reading today that, and if you've covered this in prior classes, I'll catch up on videos. So, but in case you haven't, I was reading today that in some streams of Sāṃkhya, they do include Ishvara, but in mainstream Sāṃkhya, it doesn't. But then why does Patanjali, when the system is based in Sāṃkhya, include Ishvara?
Well, tradition says there were two Sāṃkhya tradition, two basic clusters of Sāṃkhya traditions, Sa-Ishvara and Near-Ishvara. And some folks like Shankara would say yoga is Sa-Ishvara and Sāṃkhya is Near-Ishvara. I've in my commentary, I question all of that, and there are scholars that question all of that and say actually most Sāṃkhya is this is a bit of a fiction. Most Sāṃkhya is theistic, and we see that through all of the Puranas, through the Mahabharata, which is a totally Sāṃkhya text. It's massive, great big Mahabharata. It has a whole section called Moksha Dharma. It's all Sāṃkhya, it's all theistic. So most Sāṃkhya, even the Shvetashvatara Upanishad is theistic, it's Sāṃkhya. But there clearly was a Near-Ishvara Sāṃkhya because the Vedanta tradition opposes it. When they oppose Sāṃkhya, they oppose a Near-Ishvara school of Sāṃkhya. Now, the text that we have, this Sāṃkhya Kārikā doesn't mention Ishvara, which is not the same thing as saying it rejects Ishvara. And some have argued, well, just because it doesn't mention it, it's like Patanjali. He doesn't mention Ishvara as creator because that's not relevant to his project. So, and I'm talking about academic scholars here, right? Not I'm an Ishvaravadin, so I'm always trying to wriggle Ishvara through the back door. Then someone might say, well, that's just Edwin. But academic scholars who have argued that there is actually no explicit, the Karika does not deny Ishvara, it just doesn't talk about it at all. There is a Sāṃkhya Sutra which says something like Ishvara is not necessary, na uchitam or something like that. Even that doesn't deny Ishvara. It just says, well, we can account for reality without positing the necessity of an Ishvara, but scholars have argued even that is not tantamount to rejecting it. There's no explicit rejection of Ishvara, although the Sāṃkhya Sutra, much later text anyway, 16th century, that gets the closest. So to put all that together then, Sāṃkhya is a metaphysics. And it's just like modern physics. You can have theistic physicists and non-theistic physicists. They both might accept Big Bang and atoms and gravity and magnetic forces and all of the six main forces. They might accept all of those ingredients, but some say that some are theistic and some are not. But within the contours of physics, they accept the same ingredients. So likewise, Sāṃkhya is a set of Mahatattvas. And there are some that just focus on that and they talk about that. And others which are much more like the Gita, the verse that we've just read, and all of the Puranas, they're much more robustly, because they're more interested in Ishvara. And for them, the discussion of Prakriti is just a sideshow. Well, this is just Ishvara's power. Look how wonderful Ishvara is. This is just one of his Shaktis. So their focus is different. And depending on what your focus is, you're in the Karikas is focusing on the basic, 72 little Karikas, just the basic contours of what matter is, what it consists of, what its components are. But most Sāṃkhya is theistic. Yes, and it's, you read even good philosophers that should know better. You read introductions to philosophy and they say Sāṃkhya is atheistic. They shouldn't say that. They should be much more nuanced and say, yes, perhaps there were non-theistic strains of Sāṃkhya, but most certainly there were Sāṃkhya strains of theistic strains of Sāṃkhya, and that's that's something that needs to be pointed out. And I've published on that myself. Yeah. Any other? Yeah. Any other? And your tradition of Kashmir Shaivism is all that's theistic, and that's all that takes Sāṃkhya, just adds a bunch of categories on top.
Yeah.
It takes the 24 and then it adds a whole bunch of Sada Shiva and, you know, and Paramashiva and, you know, the time and Anutva and all of that. It adds another half a dozen categories, but it's Samkhya. It's Samkhya with a theistic overlay.
Well, this is the tradition I'm following is the non-dual Shaiva Tantra. It's the recognition school, Abhinavagupta.
Right, but that's Kashmir Shaivism.
It's flows out of Kashmir Shaivism.
Abhinava is well, okay, but anyway, yeah, basically that's one cluster of traditions. Abhinava is Kashmir Shaivite, is a Kashmir Shaivite. Yeah, and they called it Kashmir because originally it actually came from South India, but then it went up to Kashmir, and then Abhinava was the one that really theologized it in the most sophisticated way.
And also the South, the Saiva Siddhantas they're a Bhakti group.
They're also dualistic.
Yes, it's dualistic.
They're dualistic, and there's a difference. Well, they're Bhakti, but Kashmir Shaivism is Bhakti oriented, but in Kashmir Shaivism, ultimately Shivoham, you are ultimately that one supreme Shiva. Right. Whereas in Shaiva Siddhanta, no, you're not.
Right.
And they would say, for there to be love, they would agree with the Vaishnavas, for there to be love, there has to be a duality.
Right.
But to all intents and purposes, you can be just like Shiva, but not Shiva.
Yeah.
And Vaishnavas say the same thing. They say, you want to have a form like Vishnu, you can have a form like Vishnu. You can have Sarupa. It's very similar.
Yeah.
It's all possible. Pick your path. But it's not all one at the end. There is a plethora of liberated possibilities, and your choices in this life you want to be Shiva, you can be Shiva. You want to be infinite, Dvaita, Brahman, you can be that. You want to play with Krishna, all of these are possibilities. I very much resist the sort of the idea that really they're all saying the same thing. They're not saying the same thing.
No, I don't think they're saying. Yeah, I don't think they're saying the same thing. No, I think they're saying different things, but I think at the state of realization, when I'm in union with, and okay, I'm not in your tradition, but when when I'm in union with Krishna, to me, it's the same experience and of course, having it the ultimate, but in the experiences that I've had, they're so juicy and rich and bhakti filled, and it's the same as my essence nature. I don't see a difference. For me, it's all Satchit Ananda.
That's fine. But my point is simply this, that there are a variety of different ultimate experiences. And just because one person has an experience, one shouldn't project that and assume that everybody else somehow fits into one's experience.
No, that's true. It's true.
There are myriad possibility of liberated ultimate states.
Uh-huh.
If we accept that whatever the traditions propose, as they propose it, not as we fiddle around and try to fit it into our whatever they say is true, if we take that position, then there are multiple different kinds of ultimate liberated states.
Yes,
and that's a beautiful thing.
And you've talked about, and that is beautiful, and you've talked about not one mountain, but many mountain peaks. And
infinite. Why should it not be infinite?
Right.
Infinite. Look at the infinity of Prakriti.
Right.
Why should the absolute be one size fits all?
True.
Let the absolute be infinitely variegated.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
If you want a Shivoham experience, that's yours. Go for it. And if other, and if everything fits into that, then that's your ultimate truth.
Yeah.
But it's going to be different for somebody else. A Buddhist is going to have a different experience. And a Dvaitin is going to have a different experience. Kashmiri Shaivas accept the reality. Everything's Chitti Shakti. There's a real world. Abhinava opposed Shankara, opposed him. So, so therefore, we have to respect these differences because the traditions themselves are insistent that there are differences. Who the heck are we to say, well, really, they're all talking about the same thing? On what? That's just a superficial, politically correct kind of superimposition.
Yes.
There's my little spiel for the evening.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other questions, my friends? Don't you want to steal butter and feed monkeys? Come on, man. You want to just infinite, eternal, infinity?
Yes.
That's boring. You'll just be all omnipresent, infinite bliss. when you could be stealing butter and feeding monkeys? What's wrong with us? Come on.
Hey, Edwin, I am so glad what you and Preen brought up about the multiplicity of different paths that we have available to us and how that's a beautiful thing.
It is.
I have a question kind of piggybacking on that topic, though, about the balance between sadhana and philosophical studies, both of which I intensely enjoy.
Yeah. It
seems to me with all the different philosophical systems, I heard from another yogi that perhaps various Kaivalya states, they interpret it a certain way or view it a certain way. So once it's transmitted, maybe originally in an oral tradition and then written down at some point, that the differences are due to the lens in which these experiences, these samadhi experiences have been, filtered from based on their own culture or nuances. And yet you see so much headbutting sometimes with different philosophical texts and using them as a hammer to argue one system over another, which is rather unfortunate. I mean, it is good to have a critical mind when you read these texts, for sure, that's healthy, but let people have the room to practice their own path. It's just as legitimate and beautiful. I'm a Shiva Bhakti and a tantric, and I find a lot of meaning in that path, and it's not dualistic. I'm trying to merge with Brahma or Brahman. So I was wondering what your comment might be about trying to balance, given that the clarity of mind that comes through philosophical study with spending time on sadhana to attain that liberation, that ultimate experience which transcends any book learning.
Sure. But there was a lot of points you put in there. But I would say this. I don't take the view that they're all saying the same thing and it gets filtered through different chittavrittis and articulated in different terms. And then by the time it ends up on the page, it looks very different, but really it's all coming from the same place. Because that would be disrespecting what the traditions say about themselves. And who the hell am I to impose this very nice and politically correct and benevolent sort of way of thinking about things and keep everybody happy, but that's not what the traditions are saying. And I respect what they're saying. And I think that they're theologians and also intense practitioners. And if they see differences, and clearly the philosophies are different. There is a difference in experience of Shivoham and being Shiva. And clearly that's different from a dualistic, eternal, loving relationship with the Supreme Narayana or Krishna. And clearly that's different from an experience where there's no Chitti Shakti, no world, and simply omnipresent Satchidananda Brahman. So how on earth, the only way to make them all, to tell oneself that they're all saying the same thing would be to violate them enormously. And violate what they've been saying, violate centuries and centuries of theologizing with the members of that tradition. So therefore, here's our options. We either say they're all wrong. The fact that they're all saying different things proves that Freud would say, or they're all just sort of projections from the subconscious, and we're all sort of projecting our own little, onto the absolutes, and they're all wrong. And the very fact that there's so many different views proves that there's no sort of commonality at all. That's one option. They're all wrong, all mental projections. Number two, second option is to say, well, they're all true. They're all saying different things. But one is right and the rest are wrong. And clearly we have a history of that in our Western, we won't name any names, but we all know traditions that have taken that view. Only one is right, the rest are wrong. The third possibility is that there's, a hierarchy, that they're all true, but typically one's own tradition gets situated at the top of the hierarchy. And one comes up with a story, well, yeah, they're all sort of have some partial truth. They're all sort of facets of the, but really the highest truth is my tradition. Well, the fourth possibility is to say that what I would say is that they're all genuinely, ultimately true, exactly as they claim to be true. These traditions are not just theologized by scholastics. they're also confirmed by illiterate practitioners who are Kashmiri Shaivites or Vaishnavites or Advaitins. And they've been confirmed for centuries. So there's been theology running hand in hand with practice, intense practice. You've been to India, you've seen this living sadhu culture. So I would suggest if we want to respect what the traditions are saying about themselves, rather than what we want them to say and projecting onto them this sort of, they're all really saying the same thing. That's a very modern kind of imposition. Why not let them all be true, exactly as they claim to be true? And the only way to accept them all as true, actually true, not just politically correct true, and the only way to do that is to accept an absolute that is completely variegated and has multiple possibilities, eternally and ultimate and so forth. So if you want to be Shiva, you can be Shiva forevermore and be liberated in that wonderful state of Shivoham, perceive the whole world as Chitti Shakti, as just like the peacock feather, and just enjoy the spectacle of your Shakti. Or you can be a Vaishnava and reside with Vishnu in the abode of Vaikuntha, the Brahman realm made of pure consciousness, or Krishna's realm of Goloka, or you can be an Advaitin and the world will dissolve and appear unreal along with its creator, along with everything, and they'll just be your eternal consciousness with no objects whatsoever. Kashmiri Shaivism, there's an object of consciousness. Let them all be true. And if that's the case, the path we take brings us to a certain goal. We might try to say, they're all one, but they're not all one. So therefore, that's why we have scholasticism and study, because we need to decide where do we want to end up? Where do we want to end up? When you go to a train station, you don't just jump on a train and say they're all going to the same place. You're going to take a train to Shanghai and you want to go to Delhi, you're on the wrong train. So therefore, that's the place. One of the reasons for Svadhyaya is to be very clear about, okay, here are some of the options. What my samskaras that I have in my head, in my chitta, in this particular life, what option does my samskar resonates with my present samskaras, such that it seems attractive, logical, doable, coherent, and the path that I wish to pursue. So Svadhyaya has many functions, but that's one function, is allowing us to be very clear about where do we want to end up. Because if it is true that all of these options are true, well, then there are choices to be made. So let us make those choices from an informed place. And what does that mean? A Svadhyaya-rich place. The other comment about Svadhyaya is often Svadhyaya is undertaken, scholasticism is undertaken by theologians, not necessarily to convince people, but to give intellectual dignity to a tradition. Just like the great Christian theologians, you might convince a few, but often their role is to, preserve the tradition from, give it intellectual dignity and coherence, and the means by which to defend its presuppositions against any sort of outside critique. So that's the dharma of a theologian, is to provide intellectual respectability to a tradition. And that's just a separate comment. But as a practitioner, study, see what the options are. Don't try to make them say something other than what they're saying. If you're paying attention to what they're saying, you cannot avoid the fact that they're saying different things. Honor that, respect that. It's very convenient to try to merge them all into one. I know that's convenient, and there's less thinking, less choice to be done, but that's not what they're doing. They're not claiming to be one. Do the Svadhyaya, pick the path, and pick it from an informed place.
Thank you, Edwin. And that confirms my innate thoughts on the matter, that they are quite distinct and unique paths and sects and philosophies.
Yeah.
Really,
if you honestly study, I don't see how one can come to any other conclusion than that.
Right.
It's a very new agey sort of thing, what I would even call neo-Vedanta, new agey, to say, oh, really, they're all, yatomat tatopat, it's all one thing. It's just filtered through different minds and it comes out. No, that's not what the traditions are saying. No one that's studied these traditions is gonna see it that way. The traditions themselves don't see it that way.
Yeah, it's pretty clear to me, but the psychology that's going on here is of what's interesting. Why there seems to be, with some individuals anyway, this tendency to want to make that claim in the first place, when it seems pretty plain and obvious that there's fundamental differences.
Yeah, exactly.
Edwin, this is Shekhar. So I'm your latest follower. So thanks for all your talks. So my question is, do you have to follow any path, or like my prior experiences were something I could not explain, like 25 years ago, they kept happening and then I was so scared I left everything. But now I've gotten back to it after reading a lot, things make sense. But my question is, do we always have to pick a tradition, or could we practice Chitta Vritti Nirodha and then simply enjoy what comes our way?
That's up to you, my friend. I mean, even if you practice Chitta Vritti Nirodha, you're actually following a tradition, because that's the Patanjalian tradition. It's not an obvious thing to do. It wouldn't have been obvious to Plato or Aristotle, and they were great philosophers and serious spiritual seekers. It wasn't obvious to them to Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So the very fact that you even use that language, you're in that sense following a tradition. But it's up to you. Do you trust your mind? I don't trust my mind. My mind is nonsense. And I don't trust it at all. And I'm honored from the depth of my heart to follow a path that has been trod by centuries and centuries of beings greater than I, more sincere than I, more sattvic than I, that took better births than I did, that are deeply learned in ways I could never be in this life, and deeply practiced in ways like, that just amaze me. I'm honored to be following in their footsteps. So for myself, I very much appreciate guidance and something that's time tested, that's been handed down for centuries and confirmed and reconfirmed and reconfirmed and reconfirmed and theologized. Each generation of theologian communicating with time and place and responding to time and place. I'm honored to be a part. I absolutely don't feel competent and capable of doing this on my own. So it all depends on how much faith you have in your own mind. That's for you to decide.
Thank you.
Edwin, can I ask a quick question for clarification?
Yes.
In these Sāṃkhya schools that are theistic, is it understood that the Atmans arise from the same deity, or is it multiple deities, or depending on the tradition, it differs?
Yes, essentially you have the Vishnu, you have basically two theistic streams that then split up. But it really sort of going back to the oldest text, you have a Vishnu and a Shiva, Vishnu and Shiva-centric theisms. And then it's maybe just as old is the Devi, the goddess traditions, but they may be just as old, but they don't surface literarily in the literature until centuries later. That doesn't mean they weren't always around. It just means that they weren't theologized and scholasticized at the earlier point, at the same time as the Shaiva and Vaishnavite ones. So you also have goddess traditions. Now, all of these traditions accept that there is one Ishvara, but that Ishvara can manifest infinite forms, right? This is one of the if God has if form is not to be a limitation, if God is to be unlimited, which any theist would accept, Christian or is anybody, that's why Christians don't accept form for God, because they think, first of all, they think form can only be material. And second of all, they think if you have a form, you're limited, like because you're here and not there. So because they are engaging the notion of form as a material limited thing. Well, Hindu theologians immediately would, I'm writing a book on this, by the way, Hindu theologians would immediately question that and say, number one, form doesn't have to be material. It can be pure Satchidananda, a pure spiritual divine form. It's not made of matter like ours, number one. And number two, it's not limited. It doesn't have to be limited. They can be unlimited forms, all personal, all beautiful, all gorgeous. Each bhakta can have his or her own form. Each gopi thought she was the only one dancing with Krishna. You've all seen the picture of the rasa dance. You go to a Gujarati restaurant and look on the wall. You may see a picture of Krishna in a circle, famous picture of Krishna in a circle with the gopis. Each gopi has her own Krishna. So Krishna can manifest infinite forms. Now your question is, so yes, now the difference between the sects is who is the cause of all cause, the ultimate causal form from which the other forms emanate. Is Shiva the ultimate sort of stop sign final form from which Vishnu emanates and all the incarnations of Vishnu and Shakti, the goddess? That's what the Shaivites would say. The Shaivites accept Vishnu. They would, and as the creator,
there would be so if there's a Shaivite stream of Samkhya, they would believe that the different individual Atmans are caused by Shiva. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That answers my question. Thank you.
Sorry, did I just go wildly off the beaten path?
No, you answered the question perfectly. Thank you.
I just went mad. I just drank too much coffee. All right. Yeah, that's what they would say. And if you want a good expression of that, read the Shvetashvatara of the Upanishads, probably the earliest expression of that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the Shvetashvatara is a Shaiva text. Yeah. So, but then the question is, what's the relationship between a question might then be, well, what's the relationship between Shiva and Vishnu? And that's where I was going with that. They all accept the other forms. They just say that the other forms are derivative, evolutes, to use, given what we've been studying in Samkhya. The other forms evolve or derive from their, whatever the tradition says is the causal form, the ultimate form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? I'm sorry if I just went off.
I have a quick question.
Yeah. Hi there.
Hi, it's Pam.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for everything, for being here for me, for us. So I'm assuming we're winding down now?
Yes.
So I'm enamored by this lovely tapestry behind you. Will you speak of that, or is there a story about it?
It's from Orissa, which is East India. So it's an Orient type of art. It's silk. And I suppose it wouldn't call itself a mandala, but Orissa is very Krishnaite. And it's very much, Krishna is the central deity of the Oriens. So here is Krishna Lila. And now you see what I was just talking about. Each gopi has her own Krishna.
I can't see it. We need to hold it up higher. Yes, thank you.
So you see how each of the golden ladies in the saris, each has a black Krishna with her?
Yes.
So that illustrates what I was just saying. Form is not an imitation. But anyway, your question is, so that's Krishna. Then the inner circle are different Krishna leelas, the different, some of the cool things Krishna did in his incarnation. And the outer layer are also more Krishna leelas. And then the very outer layer of Vishnu, the avatars of Vishnu.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty spectacular.
It's lovely. Wow.
All painted, and it must have taken him months.
Wow.
Did you get it in India?
I did, yeah. You wouldn't, yeah.
Wow.
And and it was beautiful old school Indian Vaishnava, such a sweet man, and so humble, and just so, just that lovely old school no, I won't say pre-modern, but just, coming from the old tradition, just a wonderful human being. So, so anyway, yeah, so that's what it is.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Namaskar.
Namaskar. Any other questions, my friends? So we'll see you when we do. Have a great evening. Have a great Christmas. And we'll get together in January.
Happy New Year and thank you, Edwin.
So much.
Okay.
Thank
I
you.
hope the text hasn't been too dry.
Not at all.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin.
Even if it is dry, it gives you at least an experience of a certain aspect of the scholastic kind of very precise, step by step, this is this, that is that, which is what defines an intellectual tradition. So Hinduism isn't just about, chanting mantras and kirtans. I mean, it has these very precise intellectual traditions that go along with all of these beliefs. So even if you weren't really following or got lost or found it a bit dry, at least you have a sense of that aspect of Svadhyaya, traditional Sanskrit study. And that alone, hopefully is useful for you.
Edwin,
don't worry if you didn't get everything, or that's not the point.
But just that alone is not the only thing. You are a master teacher. You're an acharya, and the transmission from you is the most powerful thing. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone is noting that. You are just an inspirational teacher. You're so knowledgeable, and the heart of the practitioner comes forth, and the blend of those two truly provides an environment and a container for transformation. That's what happens here in your classes. So a deep bow to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If any of that's true, it's the grace of the teachers. Have a great season, everybody.
Thank you.